Alrighty, welcome back to the third and hopefully final part of this three-part review of the review of Pseychie's FGO review. So yeah, no introduction needed, and I would just want to get this over with, because I've already squeezed at least 8 hours of content already out of this, and following trends and patterns here, this will probably be at least another 3 hours long. So let's get right into it.
It's time to put your diverse servants to the test. Let's see how well FGO handles late-game challenge content.
Oh boy.
My metric for this section generally depends on how frequent and how plentiful are there ways for late-game players to challenge their roster. How I tend to standardize this is by looking at the trend of modern games. I'm expecting to see some endgame dungeons that rotate on a bi-weekly basis, such as Genshin's Spiral Abyss, Nikkei's Solo and Union raids, Reverse 1999's Limbo mode, Brown Dust 2's Evil Castle mode, and so on.
I mean, Genshin did add theater, but a side effect of that is that Spiral Abyss is no longer bi-weekly, but it's once a month. So, personally, I don't know how to feel about that. Like, I get that, MiHoYo doesn't want to give us too many gems. But yeah, Abyss and Genshin is no longer bi-weekly.
I don't believe gacha games should have a big emphasis on late game content, considering the casual nature of them, but it should still have something to reward those that have established accounts to take on a greater challenge. So historically, FGO has some pretty
I'm roughly the same position. No, not even roughly. I am the same position. Gacha games don't have to have late game content. There are gacha games out there that technically don't have, well, I was going to bring up Azure Lane, but even Azure Lane technically has endgame content. It's just that it is completely optional. Like, you don't get any extra gems for anything like, most modern endgame content, game modes do. So it's like, unless you're just a really, really big fan of Azure Lane, no one's going to do those challenge quests. It's just it's literally there if you ever want to for whatever reason. So yes, I am of the same opinion for the most part. I don't know, something about the way Pseychie worded that I'm not sure if, I don't know, the vibes are kind of off there for me. Kind of, not much. He's said other things in this video that I would disagree more with. Matter of fact, this is something I can't technically disagree with at all. It's just something about that. Let me hear statements back again from the beginning.
How I tend to standardize this is by looking at the trend of modern games. I'm expecting to see some endgame dungeons that rotate on a bi-weekly basis, such as Genshin's Spiral Abyss, Nikkei's Solo and Union raids, Reverse 1999's Limbo mode, Brown Dust 2's Evil Castle mode, and so on. I don't believe gacha games should have a big emphasis on late game content, considering the casual nature of them, but it should still have something to reward those that have established accounts to take on a greater challenge.
Okay, before I back the video up so you guys don't have to end up getting flashbang for like the next 5 minutes or something as I yap. I think where he said gacha games should have endgame content is like the one nitpick that I can make, because that kind of lines up with what I was saying earlier about how gacha games don't really need endgame. It really depends on the gacha game. Obviously, the trend right now, especially since Genshin Impact, is that you want to provide some kind of late game content so that your dedicated players, your hardcore players, if you will, have something to do after they're done with all the other content, all the casual content. So yeah, I guess there's my little nitpick. I also want to mention that, remember that I keep harking on and on about how FGO is an old school gacha, and that Pseychie he seems to be a new age gacha player, because, I mean, again, for like the third or fourth time, he started with Genshin. So, obviously, Genshin and other new age gacha games like it are kind of his bar for his bar, right? His what? Minimum level requirements. Weird phrase to use there, but I mean, he said so. He said enough of it himself too at the beginning when we first started this late game content segment, that he's gonna judge it by modern gacha gaming standards. So no surprises there. Well, you have to understand what FGO's endgame content specifically is that because it's old school gacha games, at least the ones I played, they don't usually have like dedicated end game content. Not the kind of standardized content you see out of new gacha games like Spiral Abyss, MOC, Pure Fiction, Apoc Shadow. What else am I missing? Shiu Defense, Deadass. Well, Deadass is kind of its own thing technically, but well, I know it's still endgame. It's definitely still endgame, and all the other endgame content, like game modes that all the other gacha games have come out with ever since Genshin, they all took that shit from Genshin, basically. One of the many things that Genshin Impact set in motion as like an industry standard with its release back in 2020. But before Genshin did that, a lot of old school gachas such as FGO, their endgame content was focused on story or events, specifically events. For those of you who don't play FGO, maybe Pseychie will get into it here in the video himself. But a lot of the end game content that comes with FGO come in the form of what are called challenge quests, where every event we get one, maybe two, dedicated high difficulty challenge quests, where you fight against a boss, like a really, really tough boss. Well, they're supposed to be tough. Or two, or three. It depends on what the kind of... It really depends on the event and what kind of challenge quest it is. Like, literally could be about anything. Or they could throw anything at you. Thematically appropriate, of course. Like, if, for example, we have the Valentine's event going on right now. It's about to end at the time of this recording, but hey, I'll just use that as an example. You know, you can expect that challenge quest in a Valentine's event to be kind of themed around Valentine's. Stuff like that. But as for, like, the in-game mechanics, it can really be basically anything. The developers can get very creative with what you have to fight in these challenge quests. Some are easier than others, for sure, because they like to experiment with different gimmicks and see what works, see what's hard, or see what the players find difficult, blah, 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 whatever. So that helps them, like, put together more future challenge quests for future events. Particularly during some of our lottery events, like, for example... what are supposed to be our autumn events, but I'm thinking of Battle in New York 2, basically Guildfest 2 is what the players call it colloquially. That event basically threw at us a compilation, like a challenge quest gauntlet, where they took all the challenge quests from the previous lottery before, so from Guildfest 1, and on top of that they shoved in another like 6 or more new challenge quests that you had to go do. Technically you didn't have to do them, but considering they all gave you a ticket, it's like, if you want to roll more on Gacha, try these out and get fucked. So yeah, what I want to say right now is that endgame content FGO is not only focused on events and the story itself. That's one thing I wanted to mention. I don't think I did yet. The fact that old school gachas tend to focus their endgame content in the story itself. Because throughout, I mean, we kind of alluded to that in an earlier segment of the video where Pseychie brought up the fact that, oh yeah, Camelot and Singularity 5 or 6... Singularity 6, let's just go with that, had that difficulty spike, right? So that's kind of like the example of how FGO treats its endgame. It treats its own story as part of that endgame. Not necessarily how new gacha games, modern gacha games do it these days, with like a rotating, like a cycle, right, or a refresh system of like a permanent game mode. If it's, usually they're permanent, but its rewards refresh every 2, 3, 4 weeks, depending on the gacha, and you can keep doing it every time it refreshes for that cycle's rewards. And once you're done with it, you just wait until next cycle to refresh, and then or to come along, or the cycle to refresh, and you do it again, ad infinitum. Is that the proper Latin phrase? I think it is. So yeah, just so you know how FGO handles its own late game, and that's a very important distinction between old school gachas and new school. Of course, I'm sure there are old school gachas out there that kind of already did the whole modern gacha endgame trend of like having established perma game modes that just refresh, but FGO certainly wasn't one of them.
So historically, FGO has some pretty difficult story fights. I won't consider these as late games since they're available to be played at any time. Plus, the game
and that's where I disagree. Again, Pseychie has only been at least compared to a boomer like me, he's only recently started playing Gacha. So while I don't fault him for having this stance, it's not necessarily let me backtrack a little. While I don't fault him for having the stance, I do disagree with him not considering Endgame like story like hard story fights as Endgame. And here's the reason why. FGO progress gates its stories, or one of the reasons why anyway. FGO progress gates its story, or progress gates its events rather. They occasionally release events where if you are not completely caught up with the story, you cannot enter the event at all. Now, other Gacha games also do this, like Star Rail and FGO, or not, sorry, FGO, Genshin Impact, right. That is also a thing in those two games, but the difference between those big Hoyo games and FGO is that Genshin's and Star Rail stories are fucking easy, whereas FGO's is not. It's quite the opposite. So no, I wholeheartely disagree with Pseychie here. I think that for old school gacha, a lot of old school gachas out there, the story has to be considered endgame. Because what else are you going to consider endgame here? Given that he doesn't consider this endgame, I'm sure that's going to be a kind of a big issue for him throughout the rest of the segment. I would assume, or I would predict, but we'll see what he has to say. But just know that if you were to ask me, I think that you have to consider story content as endgame.
Game gives you quite a lot of revive items, so even if you don't care about the challenge, you can just use them to enjoy the story. For every event, there is also a challenge quest, often abbreviated as CQ, that has you pitted against a difficult encounter. It's arguable that you don't have to do this, but considering that the reward for the first time clear is a crystallized lore, which is one of the rarest upgrade materials in the game, so it's highly advisable that
It's kind of funny hearing him call it one of the rarest. He is technically right. Grails, lores, and gold foes are the three most important items that you can get in FGO on your account rather. And that actually matter. Technically, you have to include faux pas, the shit that, increases the flat damage of your individual face cards, but those don't really matter most of the time. Gold foes and, the three that I mentioned, Grails, Lores, and Gold foes are the three rarest that actually matter, at least in my opinion. It's just funny to hear him say that lores are rare because lately the trend has been that, oh yeah, the game just throws lores at you. They used to be very rare back in the day, during like the first couple of years of its life cycle. But then but the developers, like the devs, realized over time that they're putting out more servants that people can, like, people's materials, especially the non-farmable materials like Grails and lores, couldn't really keep up with that. So they cranked up the amount of lores that you get. So the pressure to get challenge quests done these days is quite a bit less than it used to be, because you can afford to just skip them because you're going to get a lot of lores outside of challenge quests just by doing the rest of the event just normally. And obviously just doing the event normally is usually a lot easier than trying to bash your head against challenge quests if you don't think your account is like equipped enough or like ready yet to deal with like challenge quests or whatever. Again, the only reason why the bigger reason why you would want to do challenge quests these days, at least in my opinion, is just to grab that ticket that they usually give you too. Actually, do they usually give you tickets? I might be thinking of the Gilfest and the Nerofest challenge quests. I know those gave you a ticket. Maybe regular challenge quest for regular events don't give you one. Actually, could be wrong about that.
that you do clear it at least once. Historically, for the first 5 years or so, FGO's events will run for 2 weeks each, which was the standard for most gacha games. But now they have been extended to 3 weeks, meaning the frequency of CQs have been broadened.
Yep, and I've already explained in the last 2 videos why that's the case, I believe.
Outside of this, there are the occasional advanced quests that I actually quite like, as these are permanent and some of them test your abilities to make some weird and niche teams. I wish more of these came out frequently, since I really don't think they take much effort to do. So, FGO is home to some of the most unique...
Oh yeah, these advanced quests. I keep forgetting these are a thing because they only started like cranking these out after I started taking a step away from the game, or in other words, stopped really wailing really hard on FGO about starting 2 years ago at this point. But yeah, advanced quests. I guess technically you can consider them endgame. I guess. I wonder what I can I wonder what I can like compare them to. Like think of them as like a unique like side challenge where like as Pseychie kind of described, each fight kind of has like a gimmick. I'm sure there are other gacha games out there, especially new ones that also have like gimmicky side event modes like this. Where I believe every advanced quest has like a certain gimmick that you kind of need to know beforehand going into it, or either that or you have to figure it out yourself. And you have to like figure out, oh, what's the best way I can beat this. Some of them are more straightforward than others. But yeah, I suppose advanced quests are endgame technically. So yeah, I'm not surprised that Pseychie considers this endgame. I don't really consider it endgame, but I would have to admit that it has to be. But it just doesn't feel that way to me because I'm such a boomer, and most of the time I played FGO, we never had these advanced quests. That and for us FGO boomers, the only reason why you do this, the only reason why you do advanced quests is one, to get like, some of them give out like these very specific craft essences that like boost your drops of like very specific bronze materials by a small amount of percent. Like I don't know why. I don't even think it's worth doing these advanced quests just to get those kinds of craft essences. But hey, at least it completes your CE decks, I guess, as we like to call it. Then I believe we get limited time master missions later on at some point. I don't think NA's gotten it yet, but we'll get a few. We'll get like a series of master missions eventually, where the game does give you more sync quartz the more advanced quests you have completed by at that time they come out, or within a certain amount of time when they do come out. So yeah, we're gonna have to all do those advanced quests eventually, one way or another. But yeah.
Uniquely designed characters. They tend to lean into their different niches, and solving the puzzle of a challenge quest feels very satisfying if you do pull it off. If you manage to get around the jank of the menus and the UI...
Let me go back to hear what he said about the challenge quest stuff.
They tend to lean into their different niches, and solving the puzzle of a challenge quest feels very satisfying if you do pull it off.
It's like a 60-40. He is right technically for the most part. The majority of that statement is fairly true. However, and this is a very big however, it's hilarious. I find it hilarious that he's using footage of a Guildfest 2 challenge quest. Now, to be fair, the Tota one wasn't so bad. This was one of the earlier ones, so it's like, yeah, this wasn't so bad, though. Even this one could kind of be bullshit, too. Most challenge quests are fine if you're well-equipped to deal with it. However, we do occasionally have some events like this one, like Guildfest 2. This is the event that I mentioned gave us like the whole fucking challenge quest gauntlet, where it threw us like 6 old ones that we already got from years past, and then 6 new ones exclusive to the newest Guildfest or that lottery event. And yeah, some of those are fucking bullshit. There's like no getting around that. What you have to understand is that, in case I didn't make it abundantly clear in the last 2 videos, FGO has a lot of sources of RNG that, unfortunately, you don't really have a lot of control over. not to say that, oh, this is the only gacha game that has RNG. Of course, a lot of gacha games have RNG. Most gacha, I would argue most gacha games do. In order to be, and the reason why they do it is because gacha games are meant to be casual. So you can have RNG. If you include RNG into it, that lowers the skill ceiling and allows casual players, or let's just call them less skilled players, to occasionally score a victory, or still do things, but then if the dice rolls true, or if the RNG is in their favor, they get to do things that maybe they're not supposed to. They'd be like, oh, I'm actually pretty good at this game. Same concept in the kind of like the late 2010s fighting games mentality, the corpo fighting games mentality of RNG, especially with fucking Street Fighter 5. And technically with Street Fighter 6, but SF6 handles that a little bit better. Where you saw a lot of like mainstream fighting games, Street Fighter, Guilty Gear Strive, I think also counts, where they like toned down the skill ceiling and added more RNG so that it makes the competitive scene, or just the competitive nature, not even just the competitive scene, just the competitive nature of those games more volatile, right, and more uncertain, so that you don't know who's gonna win, right? So that way, less established players can start taking wins off of more established, more like bigger veteran players. It's a long-ass tangent about RNG in video games, but I just wanted to use that to illustrate that, why it is that gacha games include a lot of RNG in their games, which I think is absolute horseshit, but, it is what it is. FGO is no stranger to that, but I would argue that FGO, more so than even the new school gacha games, RNG is a bitch in this game. There are legitimately situations in this game that even if you try your very best, there's really nothing you can do other than to fucking try to RNG scam by resetting the game state or whatever, by using skills to reset the game state, like I mentioned in the first video. Or if you've run out of options, well, guess what? Back to the lobby for you, buddy. And there goes your AP. Well, to be fair, these days challenge quests only cost like 5 AP. In Guildfest 2, and in the other lottery events that had a lot of challenge quests like this one, thankfully they only cost 1 AP. So that's like the one saving grace. So even if you failed, if you want to run it back again immediately, you can just jump right back in, because it only costs 1 AP. So they were extremely cheap. And they usually are, even if they're not like a lottery challenge quest like this one is. Even still, though, again, I cannot stress enough that even for an FGO veteran such as myself, and while I don't consider myself the best player out there, not even one of the best, there are plenty of other FGO players that I'm familiar with who are, I would argue, better than me. And know more about this game, that just simply have much more experience, in part because they play JP, but we'll leave that aside for now. The frustration that I have with a lot of gacha games, a lot of it anyway, is whenever something doesn't go right, and then it's not necessarily my fault, and then I've already spent a ton of time trying to clear this game mode, this battle or whatever, just for me to have to go do it all over again. I'm the type of guy who likes feeling like I'm making the most out of my time. Especially because I play 12 different gacha games, so I kind of need to hurry it up with a lot of my gachas, so I can make sure I keep up with all of them. So playing a challenge quest in FGO, for example, and losing it 20, 30, 40 minutes in, that's never a good feeling. It's some are easier to stomach than others, especially if I'm I played that bad or whatever, or I wasn't completely familiar with this challenge quest. Now that I know what they're capable of, or what the gimmick is, okay, I can go back in there with a better game plan and run it back again, take a second shot at it, and maybe the second time will go better. But despite that, there are still some times when it's what else could I have done? You do everything as best you can to the best of your knowledge, even for someone like me who knows vastly more about this game than most players, and still I can have situations where I feel like, damn, that was kind of bullshit. Granted, that doesn't happen often, right? It only really happens during it only really happened during, like, specifically this event. These kinds of, like, autumn lotteries, though technically Guildfest 2 happened in the spring, so technically they're not really autumn lotteries anymore. But still, those seasonal lotteries like Neurofest, Guildfest, those two types of lotteries specifically. I mean, I think those two were the only ones. No, we had other ones before, like Morganfest, I believe. I believe our last one was Morganfest, technically. Yeah, those lottery events those are the only events that have these specific types of challenge quests, or that are like actually fucking bullshit sometimes. The most infamous ones that I know of are the ones such as the Da Vinci, was it the DVC, Da Vinci Caster challenge quest, the one that came with Neurofest like 2 or 3, where you had like 20, you had to fight against Da Vinci Caster. She had like 20 ads, and the whole idea was that you couldn't kill Da Vinci Caster until the very end, until after you killed all of her ads. And every ad, when you killed them, either had a buff for you, or sometimes these were really bad, sometimes they had a debuff for you. And sometimes you had no choice but to kill them. One of those debuffs actually was it sets one of your servant's HPs to 1 permanently, and you can't get rid of it, and you're not immune to it. There's nothing you can do. You just have to take it. So it's like, okay, well, typically in FGO, especially for challenge quests, the most common challenge quest setup is like you take 2 meta support servants and 1 DPS, because that's the most efficient type of team comp in the game. Just rely on 1 DPS and have them just obliterate everybody, either with AoEs or single target MPs. And usually the support casters the support servants, even though they're really strong skill-wise, right, and in their support capabilities, they don't really do a lot of damage themselves. And even then, you don't want to, you want to keep them safe, because you can afford to lose your DPS, you can't afford to lose your casters or your meta supports. So it's like, well, even if you could kill that enemy that sets that sets whoever kills them, whoever sets the HP of whoever kills them down to 1, you don't want to kill them your meta supports either. So you have to kill them your DPS. So then at that, and it happens like the middle of the fight or something like that. So for the rest of the fight onwards, it's like, okay, I hope it's either pray that you keep that DPS servant whose HP is now at 1 forever, safe for the rest of the fight, which is going to be really tough, RNG even, or I hope you have a second character in the backline, or a second DPS in the backline. And one more thing that Pseychie doesn't mention here about challenge quests, especially for these super high difficulty challenge quests, that's literally what the game calls them, I believe. That's what I remember, if I recall correctly anyway. These types of events typically give you, especially lottery events, these events typically give you special event exclusive craft essences. You can only get 5 copies of them, or in other words, 1 full limit broken copy of them, and you have to get them. You can only get them from rolling a couple your first 5 lottery boxes, I believe. Or I think after you farmed, like, what was it, 10,000 lottery currency, something like that, some number like that. And most of the time for these challenge quests, you are supposed to use them. These challenge quests are designed. Usually, they're designed around the fact, or around the assumption that, yeah, you've rolled your first 5 lottery boxes, you've unlocked those special that special event limited craft essence, because what that craft essence does when it's limit broken is it literally what triples your the servant of whoever equips it, the damage of whichever servant equips it. It triples their attack, or triples their damage. It's considered a power mod. So it's technically separate from an attack buff, but just think of it as tripling their damage, pretty much. That's why you see this huge-ass damage on my fucking 3 million right here. This is not normal even for like MP5 5-star servants. Most MP5 5-star servants aren't going to do this much damage outside of like a challenge quest, unless you specifically like set them up for like, full-ass buff stacking with like triple meta supports and shit like that. But these kinds of damage numbers become more common in events that have those specific like damage boost craft essences. So, but yeah, the issue with those craft essences is that unless you intentionally keep them separate, which is not really a thing, at least not that I'm aware of. You're going to combine them to limit break them, but that means you only have one copy. So even if you bring another DPS, they're not going to have that super cracked damage boosting event CE. You can only get to one servant unless for whatever reason you want to bring double DPS. You can do that, I guess, if you don't feel the need to like double up on like the same support servant, I guess. Like if you don't want to run double Castoria or double KOL or some shit like that. And I suppose you could take like a double DPS that way. There's nothing wrong with that. People have done it before, but the more efficient and the more common way to do challenge quests is run double meta servant, either two copies of the same servant, one your own and the supports, or two different ones, and you just bring like backup DPSs in the backline to replace your DPS when they come if they happen to die. Because if you lose your meta servants, then yeah, that's usually the end of that. Usually. Unless you're about to unless you're about to beat a challenge quest, in which case, yeah, you can try to finish the job even without them. But before then, pretty tough. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that. I even forgot. I've been yapping for so long. I even forgot what Pseychie's original fucking point was. But whatever it was, hopefully my tangent here was still relevant.
You pull it off. If you manage to get around the jank of the menus and...
Oh yeah, I remembered my point. So, sudden whiplash. Yeah, Pseychie's whole thing that, challenge quests aren't usually that bad. He's right most of the time. Especially the more you know about the game and the more, established or the more stabilized your account is the term that I like to use. And of course, the more servants you have, because obviously with any gacha game, the more characters you have, the more options you have, and the more options you have, the easier endgame gets, because usually most gacha games operate off of logic of, if you have this character, then you should be able to beat this. It's usually how it goes, especially FGO, especially with newer, more modern gacha games as well. But FGO, more so than most gachas, it will throw challenge quests at you at some point where, if you're not like a fucking autistic nerd who knows everything about FGO and does like solo and records themselves doing solo runs on a daily basis or like on a weekly basis every time a new event comes out, you're gonna run into situations where you're gonna just feel pretty helpless and be like, what do I even do? Like, what can I do here? Right, either because you just don't have the tools necessary to beat a challenge quest, or you've tried your best even when you do have like the quote correct servants on end quote, and you still can't pull it off. Like, this game will fucking grind your ego down sometimes.
In the UI, you can have a lot of fun in these quests. That being said, I think it's quite a shame because a lot of the cooler designs are locked by ways of limited 4 and 5 stars. Now, I would love to explore all the quirky and unique playstyles if I had more of these servants, but due to the game's stingy gacha economy, if you're a free-to-play or low spender, you really have to be selective of who you want, as you simply just don't have the freedom to realistically target most servants that release. For the record, I don't consider grinding as part of late-game content, but just...
One thing that I like to point out here, when Pseychie talks about how he'd like to play more servants, but he just can't, and he blames it on the game's stingy rates. Again, for like the 5th or 6th time by now, given that Pseychie comes from a Genshin Impact background, even though I spent a lot of money on Genshin Impact as well, just playing that game for a long time. I mean, I played it since like week 1? Or like a weekend, basically, so I'm like a week 1 Genshin player. Like, given that he started with Genshin, unless he like wailed a lot on Genshin back in the day, but I don't think so, because he mentioned that he played FGO back when he was in college or something. Like he spent his commutes reading FGO story on his phone or some shit like that. If he started Genshin before FGO as his first gacha, then like, was he not in college yet? So like, he would safely guess that he probably didn't whale on Genshin Impact. So he should know this, or he should know how it feels playing a stingy gacha game even before FGO. But anyways, the point I'm trying to make here is that like, isn't the same thing? Can't you say the same thing about what Genshin, right? With how what is it? You'd like to experiment with other different play styles of other characters. I suppose he can say that about FGO, and he can say that about Genshin Impact. Now that I think about it, I don't even know if he's made a review on Genshin Impact yet. But if he does, then I'd like to see him make the same criticism about Genshin too. Because if you're free to play in Genshin, yeah, it's not likely you're getting a lot of its characters either. So just throwing that one out there.
Release. For the record, I don't consider grinding as part of late game content, but just so you know, if you're playing FGO for the long haul, you're going to be doing a lot of farming. If you don't own any of the meta support
90 to 95%, like I said 2 videos ago,
that allow 3-turn farming, then it is going to be quite a lot more difficult and tedious to farm for materials. I personally don't find farming fun, since I think it's a tedium that could be resolved by the developers putting in features in place to make it easier. But I know some people simply
new
do
gacha
enjoy
game
the grind.
syndrome.
I think when there is
nothing wrong with
content,
it, but
I'm generally okay with the designs and the substances of them. Some of the gimmicks and mechanics are pretty cool. I only wish they did them more often. If you really wanted to, you can just skip them or use your revive command spells. I'm willing to give FGO a pass on this one, but it's teetering very close. The late game content gets a within expectations rating from me.
Personally, because FGO is the gacha game that I know the best, so I'm going to scrutinize it the most. I would personally crank this down 1 notch and put it down into below expectations territory. As much as I said that Endgame for like old school gacha games such as FGO are handled differently, I do agree. I would like to say that I do think that new gacha games these days, modern gacha games, do handle endgame modes a little better. Most of them don't do it perfectly. Matter of fact, only one gacha really does it, quote, well, or like decently at least, and that would be Arknights, at least in my opinion. And most other gacha games, you know, they just stick in a fucking endgame mode with a couple gimmicks in it that refreshes every 2, 3, 4 weeks and calls that endgame. And I know they can do much better than that, but they just don't for whatever reason, you know, unique to the developer. But it is, for what it's worth, a step in the right direction at the very least. That is preferable to whatever dog shit FGO does here, right? Endgame content. Even when I include story as endgame, which Mr. Pseychie here clearly does not. Even when I include endgame, even if you go off of my definition of what endgame content is in this game in FGO, I still wouldn't really consider it a lot, right? Because story is a one-time thing. I mean, Pseychie mentioned earlier that you can't play old story fights outside of like the occasional memorial quest that we get once a year during anniversary. So obviously you're not going to be able to play that whenever you want, unless you like make a separate account for it. But that's a ridiculous thing to ask of people. Yeah, even including that, I would say FGO's endgame content is quite lacking. I mean, any gacha game that is like 90 to 95% farming, that's like I was about to say I'm no expert, but I literally called myself the god of gacha, so I guess I have to. I guess I am one, just by default. As someone who's played a lot of gacha, let's just put it that way, that's not acceptable as from like an end game perspective. If most of what you're doing in a gacha game is just farming, it's not that it can't succeed. I mean, obviously, FGO is still alive and kicking, especially in JP, though not without its problems. That very clearly makes you an old school gacha. Most new age gacha games do not demand that out of their players for very good reasons. Like, even though I'll, roast new school gacha players such as Mr. Pseychie here for like not knowing what kind of hell we had to go through back then, despite me, despite my, boomer gacha stories about all the horror stories we had about, shitty gacha, dog shit farming, I still wouldn't want to wish that upon anyone. Right? So Pseychie is 100%, 150%, 200% even justified. And, where was I even going with this? Sorry, I just lost my train of thought entirely. I must have gotten my personal bias against FGO take over here. I think my original point was something like I would argue it's below expectations here. While Pseychie put his within expectations for Endgame. But yeah, let me just wrap up this train of thought, because it's already been derailed 3 or 4 times, by saying that I would personally crank this down even further. I think Mr. Pseychie is being generous, and while I understand because he hasn't been playing this game as much as I have, perhaps when he plays it for longer, he might crank this down too in due time. Maybe not, though. It's kind of hard to explain how I feel about FGO's Endgame and just FGO overall, because most people haven't played FGO for 7 years straight. So, like, I understand his critique here, or his score here. It's not even score, but his rating here. But yeah. If he had decided to crank it down to below expectations, I would have been like, yeah, that's probably where it should be. FGO definitely needs more endgame content, or like at least more fun gameplay. Actually, now that I'm on this tangent, here I go again. There is one event that FGO did several iterations of. It kind of experimented with a new game mode. It was called the Grail Front. I think Mr. Psych if he's been playing for the past 2.5 years, going on 3, he should have played at least 1 or 2 of these. Grail Front is a special game mode, or a special limited time event, where it was really, really different from your usual gameplay. Basically, it was like a board game style game mode, where you have this battle stage, or like this map, right? Think of almost like an RTS, but instead of a full ass map that you can traverse around, you just have nodes, right? And your servants, your characters or your servants are denoted by little indicators, and you can have them move from node to node, basically. So almost turn-based, basically. A pseudo turn-based game mode, pretty much, where it's basically you against an AI opponent, and the goal is for you to have to kill all their servants, or technically there's 2 objectives: either eliminate all their servants, or go for the AI enemy master themselves and hit them 3 times and you win, because obviously without a master, servants can't operate. So either or. Usually it's a lot easier just killing all the servants, but in case the AI does something stupid, and they do stupid things a lot during those events, you can kind of trap them, box them into a corner. You can eventually kill them really fast that way. Usually I just went for all the servant kills, because that's more fun. At least I found it more fun doing that. And yeah, I think that was a really interesting take on FGO. They've only done Grail Fronts maybe 3-4 times. I know NA's gotten it at least twice. Maybe we got it 3 times. I don't quite remember the third one, or if we had 3 or not. I think JP's had 1 or 2 more. I don't know. I don't think JP's had gotten another Grail Front event in a while, so don't quote me on that. But I found that game pretty interesting. It was a pretty interesting twist on the usual FGO gameplay. Because what is it? Not only did you have, because how shall I explain this? The other restriction on this Grail Front event was that you can't just put in as many servants as you want. The game gave you multiple servant slots, but each of them had its own unique like servant class. So if you started up a Grailfront fight and you saw a starting node, like a spawn node, where that had let's say for example, the caster class on it, you can only put a caster servant there. And you also only had a limited amount of party points. Remember the party points from a regular FGO gameplay. Well, here it's also been repurposed here too, but oftentimes you can only take like what 4, 3, maybe sometimes there were some fights that you can only take 2 5-star servants if you want to also give them 5-star craft essences too. Craft essences also take up party points, and so if you wanted to put in the trade-off was basically, do you want to put in more high rarity servants and gear, craft essences that is, or do you want to put in less of them? Sorry, that's the word I should have used. Or do you want to deploy more lower rarity servants and gear or craft essences? So that was kind of like something you had to juggle with and think about. And normally, I don't really like the party cost restriction in like normal FGO gameplay, but in the Grailfront events, that was actually very interesting because you had to figure out how to beat like a small like a group of enemy servants, because obviously the enemy servants aren't like beholden to those kinds of thresholds because they're AI. So you can kind of outplay them, right? But oftentimes it's like what, 3 versus 7, 2 versus 7, and even though that might sound unfair, it was still a lot of fun figuring out like, okay, I can deploy these servants with these craft essences, and I can send them here, right? You can take a look at the map before it starts, be like, okay, I want this is how I want my starting game plan to go, and then execute accordingly, and then improvise as you go on, as you go. Right, with every development that happens, with like, oh, you kill these servants, or one of your servants gets killed, so it's like, okay, what do we do now? There are also on the map like different nodes where there are like buffs that you can pick up, or like nodes that have specific buffs applied if a servant stands on them, either yours or the enemies. So you kind of have to strategize around that too. It was a fairly simple turn-based like game mode, all things considered, but it was still a lot of fun. It was really interesting. And that's like the one game mode where I would consider an FGO, a legit FGO PvP RTA game mode or something like that. Like traditionally, I've never wanted a PvP mode in FGO, just because of how dominant whales would be in this game. How much stronger MP5 servants will be against everyone else. That, and this game isn't even optimized or designed to have PvP in the first place. So if Los Zangle or Delightworks even back in the day wanted to design one, it's like I wouldn't really trust them to make a good one, But the Grailfront was interesting enough that like if they ever wanted to do a PvP, it's like, yeah, they could actually use that as kind of a framework. But who knows if they're ever going to do that? Probably not. I just want them to put out more Grailfronts because I find those events fun personally, but I don't know how many JP's gotten since NA's started getting them, so. But yeah, like more and more like wacky, fun little game modes like that, those will certainly help, but as Pseychie mentioned earlier again, that events have been extended from being 2 weeks to 3 weeks long, and I mentioned that too in one of my previous videos, in one of the 2 previous parts. Yeah, like we just don't get as many events as we have, so the rate at which the devs can like evolve the gameplay has been reduced significantly. So, oh well. Anyways, moving on.
I think the main issue is the content schedule, which I will talk about later, as late game challenges should ideally be a routine thing that happens every couple weeks, and not tied to an event. When judging fear of missing out elements, I believe that a player should be able to jump in at any time without feeling that they've missed out on something. Additionally,
ideally, of course, in an ideal world, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have Gacha at all, because Gacha weaponizes FOMO, right? It's FOMO the game pretty much. Now the best we can get, the best gachas can get at managing FOMO is establishing establishing a system where they minimize FOMO, right? They keep FOMO down to a minimum. It's just that most gacha games won't do that because, you know, they want to make money. So, and yeah, FGO obviously does it one of the worst out of everyone, at least out of the ones that I play, out of the gachas that I play. At least I would argue, technically, you can argue that, you know, you don't have to buy into the FOMO of FGO, especially these days, now that we have, like, really, really busted servants and really, really universal servants. But even then, if you're the type to, like, do a lot of challenge quests because you're really invested in this game, it's highly advised that you roll for different servants who are capable of different things, so that way your account is more prepared to deal with, you know, all the different sorts of bullshit that the game tries to throw at you. Like, this game is not Genshin Impact, where you can just run right in fucking National every single Abyss cycle, for the most part.
And should be rerun and periodically be made available to let players revisit them. FGO in this regard gets a disadvantage compared to previous review entries, since it has been running for 9 years and we can see more of its track record. Let's establish what is actually limited in the game. Well, aside from the exclusivity of limited servants talked about earlier, some events will contain a welfare and/or event CE for you to pick up. The value here is pretty good, as some welfares are actually quite powerful. The same goes for the event CEs, and you even get a free MP5 copy. If you were not able to snag them when they were live, you would either have to wait for a rerun or via the upcoming Invocation Festival system, which will allow you to reclaim past welfares as they are released. This is actually pretty nice. Even if an event is rerun, if you already have the welfare servant from the first run, then you get copies of rare prisms instead.
Mr. Psycho will probably mention this later, but while the evocation, whatever the fuck that shit was called, is nice, it's basically a system that returns older welfare servants we've had come out over the years. The problem with this is that, one, they started this fucking 7 years into the game. So, for example, if you wanted, say, one of our earlier welfare servants, such as, I don't know, Santa Rider or Santa Altar, Salter, but as a Santa, it's weird. Don't make me explain that shit. So, anyways, if you want to pick up Santa Altar, who was our very first Christmas welfare, and you missed out on her event and her rerun back in 2017 and 2018, and let's say you're like Mr. Pseychie, who only started playing FGO back in 2022 or something like that, 2021, 2022. Or hell, maybe you played, like, you started FGO right after Santa Altar was gone forever, or at least gone for years. You have to wait 5 years to see Santa Altar return. Actually, NA does not have the evocation, at least at the time of this video recording. NA does not have that evocation bullshit yet. We're probably gonna get it this year, I would imagine, because I think JP's had it for a while now. It's either this year or next. Probably this year. But, imagine being an FGO player, right? Either JP or NA. And you join the game right after a certain welfare servant just disappeared forever, right? I mean, hell, there's an FGO streamer named Miss Pocket Chalk, who I'm familiar with. I'm pretty good friends with her. And I think she wanted, who was it, Santa, right? Santa Altar? And for years she could not get her because she was just simply not available. She was a welfare servant. If you were not playing that event, if you were not playing Christmas 2017 or the Christmas 2017 rerun the following year, when would they come back? We just didn't know before JP announced the whole evocation thing. The second kind of shitty part about it, it's becoming less and less relevant, though, to be fair, because we only have so many welfare servants. But at least in the beginning, when they first announced it, the devs were like, okay, we're going to start putting in old welfares again, but we're only putting in 4 at a time. which is why if I scroll back here, which is why like 3 or 4 at a time, which is why you see here every part of this evocation festival shit gives you either 3 or 4 depending on like what part you're talking about here, right? Basically, they release them in batches. Then again, I don't know how quickly they've been releasing old servants, old welfare servants. If they were only like, let's say like a month, maybe at most a couple of months apart, then sure, whatever. I guess it's not that big of a deal. But certainly at the beginning, we're like, okay, well, it's great that we're getting these servants, these old welfare servants back, especially Ryder Kintoki, who's widely considered, I would consider him one of the best welfare servants in the game, who's really, really good just in his own right, even if he weren't a welfare. They could have easily sold his ass as a paid limited time event servant. I don't think anybody would have had a problem, but that's just how good he is. And Santa Quetzalcoatl, she was a lot more rare for different reasons, but that's not relevant here in this video. So at the beginning, we're like, oh great, we're getting these 3 servants back, but they're only releasing these 3 first. How long do we have to wait until we get the others? Right? Let's say, for example, you missed out on BB from back in 2018, 2019, the original CCC collab event, right? And you missed the rerun too. Well, technically, couldn't you get BB because they included extra CCC as part of main interlude? Assuming for the moment you can't get BB through that, through the main interlude. Like, if you wanted BB, right, and we're assuming that the time frame is that we're at the time when Festival Part 1 just came out, right? How long do you have to wait until BB? Again, I don't play JP, and I haven't really kept up with the news for this evocation shit in particular. So maybe BB didn't come out too much longer after the first guys, or after the first guy and girls. But like my question is, why didn't they just fucking give us everybody at once? How hard would that have been to implement? Well, what was stopping them? These are all old welfare servants, bro. Right? I know there's a lot of them, right? But what exactly was stopping Lozangle from just shoving all of them into the game back into the game at once? Why do we have to? Why did they decide to fucking split the shit up into 8 parts? So fucking retarded, bro.
Welfares as they are released. This is actually pretty nice. Even if an event is rerun, if you already have the welfare servant from the first run, then you get copies of rare prisms instead. Pretty generous for those that have been playing for long. Events historically do get rerun once, but after...
I mean, what I will say is it's at least better than what fucking MiHoYo does, or I guess more accurately, what they don't do. Festering Desire, anyone? R5 Festering Desire, by the way. Free-to-play Farina players out there, you would like to get your hands on Festering Desire now, wouldn't you?
After that, they're either added as a main interlude so you can play them at any time, or in some cases not rerun at all. This is something I have a grudge with in live service games, since some events have important lore implications that newer players wouldn't know that they existed. There's also skins or outfits.
Especially for FGO, because FGO story is actually good. So if you're actually following, if you're following the story, you actually have a vested interest in reading the story. To be fair, if you just want to read the event story, then if you go to your settings in your game materials, then you can read all of the event stories. You just can't play them, but you can at least read them. So since Pseychie was criticizing FGO on the grounds of like lore reasons or like story reasons, that one's kind of a lukewarm. That's kind of a I don't want to call it a bad take, because he's technically not wrong if you apply that to like other gacha games, Genshin. But you can, at least with FGO, you can at least read the event story back, even if you haven't played it yourself. I think that's how that works. I'm pretty sure anyway. If that's not how it actually works, then I apologize ahead of time. I wouldn't know because I've played all the events in the game, so I have all the event stories cataloged. But yeah, assuming that for the moment that I'm correct on this, yeah, I don't think Pseychie. I don't quite agree with Pseychie on that one. At least not in the context of FGO. In other gacha games, sure, but not here. One last thing I want to mention, and this is something that Psyche mentioned at the beginning with like, oh, like you can get event welfares and stuff later, even if you don't get them now. It's not necessarily about the welfare servants themselves, but Psyche is also didn't mention the fact that you get grails and crystallized lores out of these events, right? And so if you miss these events, there's no way for you to recover those grails. They're just kind of gone forever. There's no way for you to get them. Classic gacha shit, right? Where it's like, oh, if you weren't playing from the beginning, if you have these super rare, super limited event materials that you can't farm for normally, then you can go fuck yourself, right? Too bad. You weren't playing since the very beginning. Go fuck yourself, right? You know, Genshin does that. Technically, Star Rail does that, but to a lesser extent, I would argue. A lot, if not most gacha games do that whole fucking bullshit of if you weren't playing since the beginning of the game, it's like, well, then yeah, you missed out on a lot of stuff. Missing out on gacha currency is one thing because, you know, it's like, yeah, it sucks that if you weren't playing from the beginning, it's not like you know, the game's gonna give you, oh, here's all the, you know, gacha currency you missed out on because you weren't playing since the beginning. They're obviously not gonna do that. Because, you know, the whole point of the gacha game is trying to get their players to, you know, pay for more packs and stuff. So that I sort of understand, at least, even if I don't, you know, think it's quite tasteful. But like for like in-game event materials that you normally can't get otherwise, yeah, that shit is like, well, why? That just sucks even more, is what I want to say. Especially in a game like FGO where grails are pretty fucking important. Crystallized lores are pretty fucking important, and, you know, so on and so forth. The one caveat, maybe, is what I can say, is that in FGO, when you get an event rerun, if you didn't play the original run, and that event had a grail in it, you can still get that grail. However, if you're an old player and you did play the original run of an event, and you already got the grail, the game remembers that you already got that grail, and so instead of a grail when you finish the event story, it'll just give you a crystallized lore instead. That lore cannot be obtained by newer players who did not play the original, so they're still missing out on something. So that's a little something that I want to add there, that Pseychie didn't bring up, that he either forgot or wasn't aware that, you know, that's how it is. And again, I want to emphasize that that's especially bad with FGO, because like missing crowns in Genshin, for example, yeah, that sucks. But at the same time, Genshin Impact is not a game where you have to crown anybody. Like, crowning is purely to flex, right? You do not have to crown anybody in Genshin Impact. You can 36-star MOC. As long as you have, as long as your appropriate talent levels are all maxed out, as far as that you can take them without crowns, at least. You know, so in other words, level 9, and you know they have good gear, good enough gear, right? And you play well enough. That's usually good enough. You don't really need crowns. But in FGO, it's like, well, you sort of fucking need those crystallized lores, and the grails actually make a fucking difference. So this is especially egregious in FGO more than other gacha games, that's for sure.
Lastly, we will talk about variety and content frequency. How often does the game receive meaningful updates? How about developer responsiveness? This section primarily takes a look at how well the game is maintained for the long term, including ways to shake up the gameplay loop for more variety. Once again, FGO gets a bit disadvantaged since we can see more of their track record, but at the same time, if this is done well, that would also speak about the quality of the game. Let's see how events and update schedules are handled in FGO. For the first 5 years of the game, normal events ran for 2 weeks, with the more major events like Summer running for 3 instead.
That's correct.
In my opinion, should be the standard for gacha games. The majority of content patches, if you look at the wider spectrum of the market today, all have 2-week events, then a brief maintenance period before the next one arrives. There should be very minimal or no downtime where nothing is happening. This has changed in the last 2 years.
There should be very little to no downtime where nothing is happening. I disagree. Most of the time, yes. Actually, not even personally, not even most of the time. I would say in the majority of the time that a gacha is running, yes, there should be like some sort of limited time event, or maybe not even limited time, some sort of event going on, like new content that will keep people occupied for that patch. However, I strongly advocate for gacha games to have at least some to interject at least some downtime. I think it's perfectly fine for gacha games to have entire patches where there's not a lot going on, right? Every once in a while, not all the time, like Genshin. But it's not. Sometimes it's okay for gacha games to put out patches or client versions where not a lot is going on. This does depend on the game, though. Like, for example, with a game like Genshin, that's open world. That's an open world RPG where you have to physically run around and do shit. It's more acceptable because, especially when a new region comes out, obviously everyone's working on, or not everyone, but a lot of players, a lot of the dedicated players at least, are busy running around, getting all their exploration done, grinding exploration for all the extra primo gems, blah blah blah. So that's going to take them some time naturally, unless of course they get it all done in a fucking day, in which case, good for them. But not all of us are like that. But yeah, some gacha games have a bigger pass than others. Like, in comparison, Star Rail is like, like, they don't have as big of an excuse not to give us like regular content, because Star Rail is a fucking turn-based game. Yes, it does have like pseudo open world moments, but it's nowhere to the extent of Genshin, for example. And like, Star Rail's story, well, Genshin's story too, but hey, at least Genshin is open world. Star Rail's story is, it's just dialogues of just dialogue, text, and then you fight a battle and you're good, right? That's all that happens in Star Rail's story, at least. So for a game like Star Rail, right? The last couple of patches we had in Star Rail, players, including myself, have been bitching about how, there hasn't been a lot to do in Star Rail. It's literally just story and then some lazy ass events that they literally just rip straight from story, at least for 3.0. 3.1 doesn't seem to be looking any better. And that's it. And we didn't used to have that problem. Most of Star Rail, actually, we had, maybe not always plenty of content, but at least there was some like interesting like limited time event for us to do. That really changed up the gameplay loop, as Mr. Pseychie would say, as said here in the video himself, like a minute ago. So at least we were kept entertained, we were kept busy. But ever since towards the end of the 2.x client version, so 2.6, 2.7, they stopped giving us that level, that amount, that degree of extra patch content for us to busy ourselves with. That and Simulated Universe, Divergent Universe, all the expansions of Sim Universe. Like, Sim Universe was great in the beginning, but it got old really fast. To the point where these days I would guess that a lot of people just aren't really feeling it anymore. It's just kind of slightly different flavors of the same boring ass, you go into Sim Universe, you pick a bunch of buffs, you click auto and just wait until everybody dies, I guess. That and the higher difficulties aren't exactly fun, because all they do is fucking crank up the stats of enemies, so they just become HP sponges and have absolutely insane attack where one hit towards the middle of or the end of a run, and on really really high difficulty just one shots your character if they don't have enough buffs, or if you don't have the right blessings or buffs or whatever. And that's not exactly engaging gameplay now, is it? So again, back to because here I go getting derailed by another tangent again. Back to the original point. So yeah, I don't quite agree. I think that gacha games should make a habit of putting in downtime every now and then. Most of the time, I'd say 70-80% of the time, there should be something to do, right? There should be a lot of content for people to hop in and play and get done while waiting for whatever next patch is. But 20 to 30% of the time, depending on the gacha game, I think there is nothing wrong. 10 to 30%, let's just say. I think there's nothing wrong where if there's a patch where there's nothing left to do, especially if it comes after like a string of patch clients or patch versions where we've had lots of content, right? They throw tons of content at us, and then we have one patch like, okay, we don't really have anything going on. It's like, okay, phew, we can chill for a little bit. We can chill for the next 4, 5, 6 weeks until the next client version. That can also give developers themselves some time off too, or like at least time to sit down and brainstorm. Okay, what do we want to do for our next couple of patches moving forward, or like other patches in the far future, that sort of stuff. Right? It's good for everyone when it's handled properly. Problem is, a lot of gacha games don't handle it properly or don't seem to know how to. So yeah, that's what I would imagine. That's what kind of gives like downtime patches or like dead patches their negative connotation. And a lot of new school gacha players don't really know what it's like to like have a ton of content on their hands at once. Well, I say that, but then no, I'm still sticking with that, because all the fucking content that new school gachas get are usually piss easy. At least compared to what me and other old school gacha boomers have had to deal with our old ass gacha games, of us having to grind 24/7 at the very least. Again, thank God y'all didn't have to go through that like we did, but still. Point I'm trying to make is that don't bitch about it. Don't bitch whenever a gacha game doesn't have much to do, because it's better that a gacha doesn't throw a shit ton of stuff at you for you to do, as opposed to the opposite end of the spectrum where it throws too much at you. Especially when you consider that every event in gacha is fucking limited, or at least most of them are. So it's like if you physically run out of time to do something, well, there you go. There, you can go fuck yourself. What? Make more time, I guess. Just don't sleep, I guess, It's so easy. That, and I guess the final point I want to make here is that everybody's schedule is different, right? Gacha players come from a variety of backgrounds, obviously, like any other community out there. But in the case of gacha games, it's nice having downtime in gacha games. Yeah, that sounded weird because I repeated the phrase gacha games twice in a row. But anyways, it's good to have downtime every once in a while, so that way it gives the busier people time to go do something else. Or at least, they don't have to focus on, just grinding their fucking degen gacha games as much. Or hell, maybe they're not even busy people, they just don't feel like playing a gacha. Right? There is such a thing called burnout. People burn themselves out on gacha games all the time. Unless you're just built different like me, but I'm not a lot of people. I'm the god of gacha, so I don't expect a lot of other people out there to be who'd also be worthy of being called fellow gods of gacha. Most people are subject to burnout. A lot of people do burn themselves out on gacha. They don't feel like playing gacha. You should not be punished for not wanting to play a gacha. And you just want to take some time off of it for whatever reason it is. I mean, hell, you can take as much time off a gacha game. You should be able to take as much time as you want off gacha and be able to come back to it whenever you want and don't feel like you missed out on much. Or hopefully not, anyway. So, having more downtime in gacha also benefits the people who, either can't or don't want to just degen grind gacha games all day. And hey, even as the god of gacha myself, there have been times where I'm just like swamped with gacha content. I mean, playing 12 different gacha games will do that to you. When like 1 week, 4 or 5 or 6 different gachas all put out new content patches all at the same fucking time. That's a real fucking doozy. Let me tell you that much. You have to keep up with them all. Yeah, that's real fun. So no, I think this is. I don't want to call this a bad take. Like, I get where Pseychie's coming from with this, but for the sake of like the overall player base for like a gacha game, no, a gacha should have at least some downtime.
Downtime where nothing is happening.
I also want to add this one last thing. how you can remedy this is having like good permanent endgame content. Not endgame in terms of like, oh, only the most hardcore players can do it. Like the and like endgame normally has that sort of connotation, especially with the fucking Hoyo games. But no, more like fun little permanent arcade games, or like, I'm a boomer. I grew up with StarCraft Brood War back in the day. And StarCraft 2 has a really, really robust custom game map like editor / mode as well. Genshin technically also has like their own like map creator. Like, we've had several events where they let players just kind of make their own like, race course maps or other bullshit like that. So that tells me that Genshin actually can support that sort of infrastructure of like giving players the ability to just custom edit their own maps. If they made that permanent and players were able to come up with like, their own, very interesting game modes that aren't too crazy, of course, and they can publish it onto like a Genshin in-game Genshin arcade, like that would be amazing, because that basically gives the game infinite content. If it's done well, at least, and people can come up with like really, really fun little mini games. Right, assuming that Genshin, the devs, MiHoYo can't come up with anything themselves. I mean, they don't even need to come up with anything new. They can literally take all like the mini games that they put in for all their events over the years. Wind Trace, all the co-op events we've had, all the co-op little mini games we've had. That little brick breaker, the elemental brick breaker we had during that one Inazuma festival we had like last year, 2 years ago, the one that focused on Ito, I think. That I think that game's based off of like another like game, I think like an old Atari game or something. I don't know the name of it. You guys will if you guys play that event, you'll know what I'm talking about. But yeah, all those like fun little mini games, they could just add them all back into the game. Just it's set like a make like this dedicated like arcade room. I mean, they technically already do have an arcade room. It's not really an arcade per se, but like they have their own TCG. I mean, you can even technically consider TCG as like endgame, quote unquote, because I believe you can play other players in Genshin's own TCG, in-game TCG. All they would need to do is just like add a new section to that, where it's like, you can go into the TCG hall, just call it the arcade hall or something, and let people just play all the previous little mini games that Genshin's had over the years. Right, that'd be great for everyone. Even better if they put like Primo Gem rewards behind them too, to encourage people to go play that content. But at the same time, you can keep playing them even after you've gotten all the Primo Gem rewards, right? Especially if you can play it with other players too, right? So they could stick in those like custom maps, like those player submitted custom maps in that sort of. They can stick them in that sort of arcade hall too, and yeah, like good endgame modes such as that. Where it can technically provide infinite content even after you've done everything that there is to be done, like all the main content in a particular patch. That would heavily alleviate this need that Pseychie's mentioning here for gacha games to have either very little to no downtime, where nothing, quote unquote, nothing is happening. So. Yeah, that's just what I want to go with it. That's just kind of what I wanted to mention. Basically, optional endgame. That if you want to do it because you have nothing better, you have nothing better to do, very well. But if you don't want to do it, that's fine, because it's not like a limited time event or anything. It's permanent content, so you can just do it whenever you want.
This has changed in the last 2 years in FGO. All events containing a story mode are now 3 weeks. Normally, I would be fine with this. If you're putting out 3-week events, then you better also put out 3 weeks worth of content. But this has not been the case.
No, it hasn't.
The length and the amount of side activities in these events have remained the same, but
for
the
most
events
part,
are grindier than before, taking up more event currency before clearing out the points ladder or the shop. What they have effectively done is artificially prolonging each event period without providing significant new content. It's weird because some people will argue that Losango is being generous because they give players more time to go through the event, but that is going to be a hard disagree from me.
Yeah, I like 90% agree. I'm on 90% backing up Pseychie here. NA is now in the part where we also have the 3 week events now. I think we just entered it like what, half a year ago or something like that, maybe even as far as last year. So we've been in the new age of FGO where all of our events are like 3 weeks long, and they're much further. They're spaced apart much further. They're spaced much further apart from each other. There we go. That's proper English. Pseychie is pretty spot on most of the things he said about the content update. It's not really an update. It's just a change. How they changed how they handle events these days from 2 weeks to 3 weeks. He is right about most of the things he said. I can corroborate that. The one thing I will say, the 10% that I don't know if I fully agree with, is the grind part. Right here, I think he mentions it around here. Technically, they did make the events grind. They did extend the increase the amount of grind that you'd have to do in order to complete an event. But as bad as that sounds, as long as you play the events every day, like you like use proper craft essence, like bonus boosting craft essences and all that, you should be fine. Like, I was playing through the recent Valentine's event we have on NA going on right now. It's going to end tomorrow, I think. I still have to do the challenge quest for it, so I gotta hurry up with that. But as for, like, regular farming and farming at everything I want in the shop, like I basically finished the event, like, 4 days ago. And I've been done with the event, like I said, 4 days ago. And I don't really roll a lot on FGO anymore for personal reasons. And so, like, I don't have any of the Gacha CE boosting bonuses. Oh, I don't even think Pseychie mentioned that. By the way, every event that FGO has, the Gacha craft essences that are exclusive to this event, on whatever rate up banner that comes with an event, they give you craft essences that boost the shop currency drop rates of like the currencies. I think I'm being redundant here. So obviously, if you roll on the banner, the easier it is for you to clear out that event shop. Easier and faster it is. Well, I didn't roll anything. I didn't roll on this banner at all. The only Cs that I had access to were the event craft essences that my friends had, because they rolled on banner. The 1 3-star C that they give you for free just to give you a little bit of a bone. It's like, thanks, I guess, FGO. Thanks, Lozangle. And then the what is it? The in-event C that you can't roll for, but you have to either farm for or buy copies of from the shop. And those boost your points, I believe, your event points. It's a different thing it's like a ladder system. It's different from the shop currency that you might see up here in the top corner here. Like, ever since the event came out, I just grinded that shit, put on my CEs as I got them, and I was done with the event like 3-4 days ago, like I said. And I wasn't even using like a super optimal farming team either. Well, to be fair, I was using a pretty good one, but it wasn't the absolute best. Like, I believe for a Valentine's event, the absolute best farming team you could have used was like double MP5 Ruler Scotty Ruler Scotty with Oberon. And the idea is that you run one of them with Black Grail, and then you just run 5-slot. 5-slot CE point CEs on everybody else, and then your stronger ruler Scotty holds the Black Grail, so that way she can nuke the level 90 plus boss, who's Jinako, I believe, because ruler Scotty is the absolute best servant you can use against Jinako, because Jinako is a moon cancer. Ruler Scotty is a ruler. Rulers are good against moon cancers. And also, Ruler Scotty has an AoE MP. And there are 2 enemies in the final fight. So Ruler Scotty was the absolute best character you could have used for a 90++ for that event. And I had to run a suboptimal team compared to that. But even if it's suboptimal, it's still pretty good. I still was able to farm it in 2 turns. My team was, what was it? Archetype Earth, Arc. Single arc. I just mentioned her name twice. And what? Ruler Martha, because I need a strong ruler and a single target one at that. And Martha's, I believe, are only, well, we have Estrella, but she's arts, and I wanted to use a buster one, so I brought Martha along, Ruler Martha, and then Plucked Suit, Ruler Scotty for the extra buffs, and Oberon. And I could only run like a 4 slot instead of a 5. And a lot of that time I couldn't even run like a full like 4 slot either. Like a lot of for like the first week or so, I only had access to like a 1 slot, 2 slot even, something like that. And even still, I was still able to finish the entire event within like a little over 2 weeks. So if you grind these events diligently, like you're supposed to, then there shouldn't be a problem. You should be able to get everything you want from the shop, and you should be able to like complete whatever point ladder is on here. This is kind of like the main thing. And if you can't do that, then, well, either you were too busy with something else, or you just forgot, or you're just fucking lazy. So that's the one thing I have to say. That's like the 10% of my, oh yeah, I 90% agree with Pseychie here, but...
more event currency before clear event period, that Lysango was being generous, because they give players more time to go through the event, but that is going to be a hard disagree from me.
And yeah, again, just to reiterate, I already explained this many times, quite a few times before. But my understanding of the situation with the devs is that they simply do not have the staff anymore to be able to support a content infrastructure where we get 2-week events like basically like twice a month. They just simply cannot do that anymore. Should that be an excuse? Not really, because they should be able to hire more people. But they just aren't for whatever reason. And to that, I have no idea what's going on there. I don't know whose fault that is. They should fix it. They're not. And if it's actually not a problem, right? Maybe Lozingo doesn't have like a staff shortage issue. Then what is their excuse then for changing their content upload schedule from 2 weeks to 3, and making events like big events like few and far between? Like, are they trying to copy fucking Genshin Impact or something? I mean, they already copied the whole fucking pity thing from them, I suppose. Well, not from them specifically, but from other like other gacha games that specifically have the Spark style pity, I suppose. But again, I mentioned before that I think that Genshin Impact was what finally convinced or finally pushed FGO to have their own pity, and I still stand by that. So
I think they're being lazy. Event duration has nothing to do with grind or runtime, but to do with exclusivity. The game gets to dictate the level of grind that players have to do. Cut down on the amount players have to farm, and naturally people will spend less time with these tedious things. The event story also doesn't have to be exclusive to the duration of the event itself. What's stopping them from just adding it to an archive so players can experience them at any time? Like when...
Actually, let me see if he adds a little. If he adds an addendum later, because he's wrong about that. FGO has the stories catalog for even for all of their limited events. Like you can pull them up whenever you want.
Nikke does. Nikke doesn't have to do event reruns because it doesn't have this problem. It's funny because if any other gacha dev tried the same thing, then the community will suddenly start asking questions like, is the game okay? Why are events being extended? End of service soon? FGO makes tons of money from the game. Everyone knows that it's not shutting down. Yet why are they falling behind in terms of content scheduling when they have been doing this for the first 5 years of the game? I know they can make fun and engaging events. Here are 2 that I found very memorable during my time playing. In 2022, I was able to catch the rerun of Summer 4, the one where you go to Las Vegas. You got the famous Japanese painter Hokusai, who has been turned into an anime waifu, the fearsome swordsman Miyamoto.
Hokusai is the octopus guy, specifically. This is his daughter. Her name is Oi? It's like all vowels in English. It's like O-E-I or O-U-I. I think the romanization can be different depending on how you spell it. or how you've been taught to spell it. In FGO, Hokusai is actually the octopus dude, and then this is his daughter. For whatever reason, I forget the exact lore on why they were originally summoned together. But this is supposed to be her dad. I know the lore about her dad though. I forgot why his daughter shows up too. Probably because of bullshit waifu reasons, but you know, gacha games. The reason why his dad, her dad, or the real Hokusai is the actual Hokusai, I should say, is a fucking octopus is because in the Nasuverse lore, somehow I forget how, but somehow Hokusai, the octopus dude, the real historical Hokusai, comes into contact with a certain eldritch god who tries to take him over basically. But then Hokusai is so fucking obsessed with his art that he manages to resist control, but he does turn into an octopus. Something like that. That's like the super abridged version of it. You can go look up how that story goes online, I think. It explains that shit somewhere. Maybe there's even a YouTube video out there that explains how the fuck, why the fuck Hokusai looks like this. But yes, this applies to both. Hokusai has two forms: a foreigner, that's their original version, and then this is their Summer Saber variant. Both of them show up in both forms. Weird shit. Welcome to FGO. Welcome to the Nasuverse.
Painter Hokusai, who has been turned into an anime waifu, the fearsome swordsman Miyamoto Musashi, who has been turned into American, but also an anime waifu.
Don't ask about the summer version. I'm not going to bother explaining that. Yeah, don't bother. Summer Musashi is a berserker, or the original. Musashi is a saber, and she also looks exactly like this and has two big pairs. Pairs? Damn. So 4 tits? A pair of huge fucking tits. You just don't see them in her saber variant, but she does here. For obvious reasons. She's also a female in her saber form. Technically, this is like an alternate universe version of Musashi. She actually... Does she meet her original, like, our like, real life Musashi? I think she might. Or maybe not. Maybe she never meets the original Musashi. But yeah, when you summon her or when you meet her, even the protagonist, even you as the main character are like surprised. I'm pretty sure that wait a minute, wasn't Musashi supposed to be a guy? So she's supposed to be a guy, but for whatever reason, she's not. I believe the official reason is that she's supposed to be an alternate universe version, I guess, but
waifu. There are also all these mini stories with
fat titties is the reason.
With servants running their own casinos, the fights were fun and plentiful. This was a good event. It ran for 3 weeks, but it was worth it. The Grail concert event following mysterious heroine X as the first foreigner welfare unit, as she competes with other idol groups. You got all these cool new idol skins for the servants, there were unique music tracks that played whenever one of the featured servants was present. It was a lighthearted story, but I could clearly tell they put effort into it. Again, this was a good event. Another gripe I have with FGO is that event main story is often time-gated. If you only have 1 day to play but want to go through the entire story in one go, well, sorry, because you better wait until the next server reset or after you've grinded a little.
Hey, Mr. Pseychie, you should be used to that. You play Genshin after all.
Aside from
or I should say, your first gacha was Genshin. That shouldn't be anything new to you. But yes, it still fucking blows.
Something else I want to bring up is the content schedule for the past 2 years. FGO is known for its characters and story. I don't think anyone will argue that. If that's the case, then these are the 2 aspects of the game they cannot mess up on. Last year in the summer, Lost Belt 6 released, and it genuinely shocked me how good it was. Reading through Avalon Lefay, I was willing to forgive any poor scheduling the game had. I think at the end of the day, we often forget that these gacha games we play are free to download. So it's kinda hard to grasp that I'm critiquing free games so deeply. I got to enjoy a story this good for free? That's unbelievable. It's really something you have to see for yourself, but Lost Belt 6 had such endearing characters, such an epic plot that as I finished it, I thought to myself, oh yeah, that's why I started playing FGO. That's why I was able to forgive its other shortcomings. So when I eventually completed Lost Belt 6, I was like, yes, that's exactly what I wanted. I want more of this. So like, when's the next main story chapter coming out?
Well, now that he's read Peak, everything's downhill from here. Well, I did hear. I think I've heard that Ordeal Call stories weren't bad, but that is how good FGO is. For FGO story, like take Pseychie as an example here. For FGO story to be so good that he was able, or at least partially able, to forgive all of FGO's other shortcomings, like the sheer quality of FGO story, the good chapters anyway, does have pretty bad chapters, so just ignore those. But the good chapters, the ones that, not surprisingly, Kinoko Nasu himself has written. He's written Camelot, Babylonia. He might have written one of the EORs. I would imagine he wrote Shimosa, probably. I forget if it was him or somebody else. But Nasu also wrote Lost Belt 6 specifically. I believe all the other Lost Belts leading up to Lost Belt 6. I believe he also wrote Lost Belt 7 too. I want to say he did. Lost Belts 1 through 5 were written by different writers, not him, I don't think. Maybe Nasu had a hand in some of the previous ones before Lost Belt 6, but for example, I know for a fact that Gen Urobuchi, or we call him the Butcher, the Uro Butcher, he's the dude who wrote, he's one of the main writers from Nitro Plus, if he's still affiliated with them. He wrote he wrote the main story for Madoka Magica. Naruto. Kinoko Nasu and Urobuchi are pretty good friends. Really good friends, actually. And that's how Kinoko Nasu got Urobuchi to write Lost Belt 3 specifically. Yeah. Anyways, back to my main point, because I love going on tangents, clearly. Now that Pseychie's read Lost Belt 6, which is the absolute peak of FGO story, possibly of just gacha story in general, I would argue, at least. Unfortunately, it's all downhill from here. Well, I mean, by now, since we have Lost Belt 7 now, hopefully Pseychie's read Lost Belt 7 and enjoyed that one too. I thought it's been pretty good so far. It's not quite as epic as Lost Belt 6 per se, but it gets the job done. It hits all the points of like what FGO is good at in terms of story writing. So I'm pretty satisfied with it so far. So I'm kind of curious actually to hear what Mr. Pseychie has to say about it. But yeah, stories take a while, especially the good ones written by Kinoko Nasu. Unfortunately, there's no getting around this. If you want good story chapters on par or at least somewhere close to the quality of, Camelot, Babylonia, Lost Belt 6, Lost Belt 7 even, basically all the chapters that Kinoko Nasu has written, you gotta wait, man. He takes his sweet ass time coming up with new chapters. That's just how he works. That's how he rolls. That's how he's been for basically all the time he's been a writer, ever since Type Moon was a fucking thing. If you just want more story in general, then sure, I guess you can. I guess you wouldn't mind if FGO's mainline stories were written by other writers who aren't named Kinoko Nasu. But if Pseychie wants the type of stories that he's seen out of Lost Belt 6, right, specifically, writing goat stories like that takes time. This isn't fucking Star Rail where Shaoji looks into the camera and says, "We're writing this epic story," and all he does is write fucking dialogue for 90% of the game, 90% of the game, and then throws in like a cutscene or two here and there, and oh, there you go, have fun. So unfortunately, there's no getting around this. There's a reason why I don't think a lot of gacha games have great story. The most that they can hope for is having a decent story that's passable, that isn't like a huge blemish on their overall track record. As long as your players aren't memeing your story as a complete fucking shit show, like for example Azure Lane back in the day, for like the first 4 or 5 years of its life cycle, like maybe 3, 4, maybe 5 is a little too long. 3, 4 years of its life cycle, where everyone was like, "Story? What story?" Right? We're just here for the the huge fucking bouncing titties and ass. Like, as long as you're not like that, then as long as you have a decent enough story, I think that's all you can really ask for as a gacha player. Like, playing a gacha with a story that's as immersive, engaging, and fulfilling and satisfying the read, such as FGOs, does not come along. You don't find a lot of those out there. They are definitely few and far between. Diamonds in the rough, pretty much. And unfortunately, a side effect of this is that you gotta wait, and there's no getting around that.
The gap between Lost Belt 6 and 7 was an astounding 16 months on the Japanese servers. Aside from the interlude chapters, which are, by the way, good in their own right,
let me actually just put this into even more perspective. Part 1, the first 7 or so singularities, so the prologue, Orleans, can I remember every single one of them? Septim, which is the bullshit Nero chapter, or the dogshit Nero chapter. What was after that? It was Okeanos. Yeah, Okeanos, so that's 4. The E Pluribus Unus, which is America, then Camelot, then Babylon. So yeah, 7, including the prologue, I guess. And then finally Solomon, the final like closing arc chapter for the singularities. Hell, let's just throw an EOR in there just for good measure. So you know, Shinjuku, Agartha, Shimosa, and Salem. Going through those 12 chapters, those 12 chapters all came out within like the first, I want to say, like 2-3 years of the game. FGO has been out now in JP for almost 10 years, going on 10 years. It's technically 9.5 years old now, which means it took FGO to put out for them to put out all 7 Lost Belt chapters. How many years again? Like 4 or 5? Yeah, it took them a hell of a long time. Yeah, like it was like over on average it took like over a year for each. Well, maybe not over a year for each Lost Belt chapter to come out. I'm pretty sure the earlier Lost Belt chapters did come out a bit faster, because otherwise that I don't know how much that would make sense in terms of like time frame. But stories like Lost Belt 6, Lost Belt 7, yeah, no. Since those are like the conclusion chapters, like the final 2 chapters of Lost Belt, they got to be pretty epic. And again, good stories take time. And again, for like the second or third time, there's no getting around that. Now, you have to let Nasu cook.
I don't consider...
Or not just Nasu, you have to let any gacha story writer cook. Because if you don't, you get Star Rail.
As main story chapters. This means FGO has only had 1 main story chapter every year. Looking at their 9 years track record, that is a record slow pace. Even on the JP side, Arc 2.5, dubbed Ordeal Call, some even refer to as Ordeal Stall, is only on Chapter 2, with the latest having released a bit earlier this year.
This one I don't know what's going on. This one I cannot defend. I can defend Lost Belt 6 and 7 taking a long time to fucking write, because we know Nasu wrote them, or at least Nasu wrote Lost Belt 6. I actually don't fully know if he wrote Lost Belt 7. I could be wrong about that. Maybe somebody else wrote that. But Lost Belt 6 definitely was Nasu. So I can defend those 2. Ordeal Call, yeah, I don't know what the fuck is going on there. I assume that Ordeal Call is kind of, they're treating like an EOR 2 basically, or EOR 2 Electric Boogaloo, where it's basically just stalling. It's buying them time for their writers, including Nasu, I suppose, to sit down together and brainstorm. Okay, what is the 3rd major arc of FGO gonna look like? And until they figure that shit out, I guess we're stuck dealing with Ordeal Call. And again, I've heard that Ordeal Call stories so far haven't been bad per se, but yeah, like the feeling, the vibes that I get is that the community, the player base knows that Ordeal Call is just like a stepping stone to what's next, to like our next major story arc. And like, how long is that gonna take them? Who fucking knows?
Now, Lost Belt 7 at the time was also considered very good in its writing, but the journey for its release was not the smoothest.
Oh yeah, it wasn't at all.
The last core of Lost Belt 6 was released in August 2021. The campaign leading up to the
it was
and
weird at the very least. Oh, here's
Road to 7
gameplay.
Was in place for almost a year. Eventually, the release date for Lost Belt 7 will be announced for Christmas of 2022. 16 months of waiting is a long time for anyone. But hey, it's the final arc of the Part 2 saga, so I guess ending it on Christmas is a pretty fitting way to close out the story. However, Lost Belt 7 will be released in multiple cores, with the second half releasing in the following January instead. Now, this is fine since Lost Belt 6 did the same thing. The issue was that there's no definite release date given. The earliest announcement was slated for the second half of January, but that's pretty vague. This could be anything between the 16th to the 31st. Even then, that's fine. As long as they gave players things to do, there shouldn't be any problems. Except, other than the New Year celebration campaign, there were 0 events happening for the entire month of January. There were 4 weeks of dead air. They couldn't put out a Grailfront minigame, no event reruns, not even a Hunting Quest campaign. And when news finally came out, people found out that there was a delay. The second part of Lost Belt 7 would finally release on January 31st, on the very last day of that month.
Classic
Alright, well,
Gacha.
at the very least, we have a date now. But we're not done with Lysengo's shenanigans. In the last 2 weeks leading to January 31st, they announced a new Gacha banner for a brand new character, Nitocris Alter. Well, who is Nitocris Alter? As it turns out, she is a character that is involved with Lost Belt 7's story arc. The only problem
Spoilers,
is that
by the way.
Nitocris Alter had not even appeared in the story yet. This banner ran from January 18th to February 1st. This means Lysengo had just spoiled everyone. Now, I know some people will be quick to point this out, but this isn't the first time that a character involved in the main story was announced prior to the story's release. The issue here is that Nitocris Alter's release window was only 2 weeks away from the actual story. How had it not been a better alternative to wait until the second core releases on the 31st, has had a chance to meet Nitocris in the story, then you put out the banner? You want to know why?
Yeah, and I'll point out that other instance before. If Pseychie finds that bad, hopefully he never finds out about Saber Musashi, because Saber Musashi they put out in the beginning as a New Year's servant of 2019, I think, or was it 2020? It was probably I want to say it was 2019, somewhere in that time frame, and Shimosa, the story chapter that she first appears in, would not release until 8 or 9 months later in that year. So if he thinks Nitocris Alter was bad, oh boy. I get where he's coming from, though. It's kind of weird for a story to spoil their own character. Personally, I it's like whatever. That's fine. Because other gacha games do that plenty of times too themselves. Yeah, I personally don't see that as an issue. Even for someone like me who's all about, FGO story this, FGO story that. I don't really see that as part of not the story spoiling part, specifically. Because whenever FGO does release servants like that, where it's like, oh, they're involved in the story in a big way, but we're gonna give them to you early, or like at the very least at the same time as like their story comes out or whatever. What they do is, I think Pseychie doesn't mention that here. What they do is they censor. I use the word censor, but don't freak out don't freak out just yet. They censor any like story spoiler information on their profile, so you won't know exactly what they did in the story until you actually read it for yourself. Matter of fact, one of the immersion factors of FGO's story is that after key points in the story, for example, in Lost Belt 7, there's a servant named Talalok, if I'm pronouncing that right, and she's an enemy. You fight her a couple times without getting too spoilery. After a couple times, her name changes into something else, and you learn more about her, and the game even specifically gives you a window where it's like, oh, this servant's profile, Talalok's servant profile, has been updated with new information, new lore, basically, that goes into more about what she's truly like, or who she truly is, and I would like if Pseychie at least pointed out. Maybe he will, but just under the assumption that he won't point that out, I'm mentioning it here. So, like, I know that he's trying to use Nitocris Alter as an example to demonstrate like the weirdness of Lost Belt 7. Yes, and I completely agree. Lost Belt 7 was handled really weirdly. I want to say this was around the time that what, Lozangle rebrand, or DW rebranded to Lozangle, or at least soon afterwards. I forget exactly when they rebranded, to be fair. Maybe it was sometime after, so maybe they don't even have that excuse. But or even if they rebrand, even if it had been like a year after they rebranded, Gacha games typically plan their content like years ahead of time, or at least that's what good gachas do. And so I can see a situation where like, when at the time that DW, the FGO dev team themselves, separated themselves from Delightworks and rebranded themselves as a Lozangle to keep working on FGO, they only had like the next 2 years or next year's worth of content planned ahead. They used that up, and now they were kind of like, okay, now what do we do, right? Now their content pipeline has been clogged because they have nothing prepared, because they have much less, staff, a lot less manpower to get stuff done, yada yada yada, so on and so forth. All the excuses that I can give here, and so that might be why things got really weird. I don't know. Again, I don't know all the details that happened. Could be wrong about a couple places. I could be wrong about everything, actually. But that's kind of what I extrapolate from the situation. Either way, either way, this, and I just want to point out here, even though I am giving you like my takes on like what the behind the scenes things were, I will be 100% real with you here. Normal players should not have to fucking concern themselves with behind the scenes stuff. That's not their responsibility. Like, all they need to do is just play the fucking game, right? It's not normal for players such as me to be so invested into a game that we know what their fucking developers are up to, or like what's going on behind the scenes. Though, to be fair, on the other hand, you could argue that a game shouldn't be handled so badly to the point where some players feel a need to even do that in the first place. So, I don't know. There's definitely like degrees of like autistic insanity you could go to here on all sides. To be perfectly fair towards everybody here. But the base point is, and I think this is what Pseychie's trying to refer to. I'm just putting it into context here, or I'm just putting it in perspective. Players shouldn't have to worry about what's going on with the developer. I mean, actually, Pseychie kind of mentioned it earlier when he had that text on his screen saying like EOS soon, or like, is everything okay? What are the devs doing? Stuff like that, right? Ideally, your gacha game should never be in a position where your own players are questioning what you, the developers, are fucking doing, right? What's going on? Why is our content being changed to something we're not used to, or at least something that's worse than what we're used to? Blah blah blah. The list goes on. So despite all the weirdness and all the excuses that I can make for Lozangle here, the bulk of Pseychie's point here still holds true, I think, right? Like, what is going on? Why has FGO's content pipeline changed like this, for the worse even? Like, aren't gacha games supposed to get better over time? That's what they're supposed to do. If you're an actual good gacha, that's what you should do. You should evolve over time, and so that way, the game still keeps feeling as fresh as it can to its players, even players who've been playing it for a long time. And like, make quality of life improvements, improve their game over time as well, big or small. So that way it gives your existing player base a sense that your game is getting better over time. And they should, because with gacha games always coming out every year, right? Always trying to steal away old players from like players from older gacha games. Older gacha games have to keep up. They have to evolve. They have to adapt or die. That's just how it goes. It's a brutal world. It's a cutthroat world out there, especially for gacha games. So,
why I think they did this? I'll tell you. Lozangle reports to Aniplex as the publisher, and as a corporation, they are obligated to generate monthly revenue reports for the game. Now, since January was a dead month with no events or reruns happening, it makes sense to put out a desirable gacha banner. However, since the story was delayed until the very last day, they decided to run the Nitocris banner 2 weeks early, in order to inflate those January revenue numbers.
That's actually a good point that Pseychie brought up here that I actually totally forgot about. Lozangle is actually a publicly traded company, or are they a publicly traded company? Maybe Aniplex is. It's probably more accurate to say that Aniplex is a publicly traded company. Like it has like a board of directors and everything. I know that because its current director of operations or board director or whatever you call them is a guy by the name of Ono Yoshinori, I believe is his name, Yoshinori Ono. I know him because he used to be the main game director for Street Fighter 4 and 5, I believe specifically. So in other words, he used to work for Capcom. And I mentioned this a few times, but I'm pretty big into fighting games, or at least watching them. I don't actually play any of them myself because I'm too bad. I'm too brain rotten by gacha games. So I don't have any brain cells left to actually play fighting games. So I do like watching them. And Street Fighter is naturally the game that I follow the most. And I got into watching it competitively back in like the Street Fighter 4 days, the very end of AE. And I started watching regularly from Ultra SF4 onwards. So yeah, I'm quite familiar with Yoshinori Ono, at least in the context of what he did for Street Fighter, with Street Fighter specifically. He did great overall. He did a great job with Street Fighter 4. Street Fighter 4 is credited by many FGC heads out there as like being one of the big reasons why fighting games were revived back in the late 2000s. Because after after the early 2000s and during the middle 2000s, like there weren't a lot of fighting games coming out, so those were kind of considered. I think those are considered like the quote-unquote dark ages of fighting games almost. And then the Street Fighter 4 came out back in, 2009? I believe it came out in 2009 because it's kind of a meme in the Street Fighter community at least, where it's like, or at least just in a general FGC, where it's like, oh yeah, a lot of people got into fighting games around 2009 because that's around the time fucking Street Fighter 4 came out. And Street Fighter 4 was obviously really, 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 really big, or it was really successful. And we got to give Yoshinori Ono credit for that, because he was the game director back then. I want to say at least, and it was Street Fighter 4 was really successful, and it brought a lot of people not only back into fighting games, but also brought in a lot of new players, a lot of new blood into the fighting game scene through Street Fighter. The problem came with Street Fighter 5. And Street Fighter 5 was a different story. If you're familiar with Street Fighter and its history, then you'll know what I'm trying to get at here. Long story short, Yoshinori Ono decided to take Street Fighter 5 in a much different direction than Street Fighter 4, and he tried making it super like esportsy, like super focused on esports. And as a result, the rest of the game suffered massively. The launch of the game was trash. A lot of the stuff that we saw in like its beta trailers got taken out and basically watered down because in the name of esports, basically. Or in other words, technically what they did was, I think I even mentioned this before, where they technically added in more RNG into the game and dumbed down character kits and mechanics to where it was even more accessible for new players to come in and play. And therefore added volatility to the competitive scene, a lot of it. But even besides the competitive aspect, when it launched, Street Fighter 5 that is, it didn't launch with a lot of like stuff that the casuals really enjoy. Like it didn't even have a fucking story mode at the beginning. Its single player content was extremely lacking by like normal fighting game standards. And unfortunately, as much good he did for Street Fighter 4, we have to give that sort of credit, the initial failure of Street Fighter 5 anyway, to Yoshinori Ono as well. And to be fair, Street Fighter 5 did improve over time, and so it's now a much better game than it was at least at the beginning. But the fact that it failed so miserably at its launch, it left a sour taste in a lot of Street Fighter fans' mouths to the point where people still think Street Fighter 5 is a dog shit game. It's a much better game now, but they wouldn't know because they got burned by the initial launch that was absolute horseshit. It was trash, and so they never touched the game again, right? At least not until Street Fighter 6. Capcom did let Yoshinori Ono go towards the end of Street Fighter 5's life cycle. I think the second to last year, I think they let him go. I don't know if he got fired or he just got replaced with somebody else. Either way, he left the Street Fighter 5 team and just Capcom in general, at around that time, during the second to last or third to last, second to last year sounds about right, year of Street Fighter V. Guess where he ended up next? He became the board director or some shit of either Los Angeles, or he's involved in Aniplex now. I believe he's like the board director of Los Angeles specifically, or something like that. And so this kind of does line up if you think about it, right? This sort of lines up the time frames of all this. At least I want to say it feels like it all adds up. It all lines up kind of nicely here. This weird ass decision that they decided to do with Lost Belt 7 can be attributed to Ono and his whatever decisions he decided to make for FGO's progression and shit like that. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if the whole idea of coming up with servant coins and shit like that came from him, or like he was the one who told Los Angeles, "Hey, listen up, we gotta meet our quotas for our quarter right now." Or like, you know, a month or two, or even a couple weeks from now. Like, come up with something that'll make us money, so we can meet our quota, meet our deadline, shit like that. Like, I would not be surprised if it's because of him. Again, these are excuses that I'm making for Los Angeles here. Are they excuses? I'm just trying to provide context. But hey, if you want to consider them excuses, then sure, why not? But just so you know, just so you have at least a little more context for what's going on. Again, doesn't excuse the fact that the way they released Lost Belt 7 was really fucking weird. They hadn't done that for any other Lost Belt before. Especially not with fucking Nidorchris Altar, unless you count again Musashi as a New Year's servant. But yeah, just some additional context here.
Despite her not being even shown in the story yet, it sounds to me that this is a company that is willing to jeopardize their creative freedom so long as they could line their pockets with some extra cash. That's what I think of this situation. Putting out a
Sony,
gacha banner
baby,
is easy. Putting out actual significant content in an orderly schedule is hard. I know this may seem like I'm picking on FGO here, but the vast majority of the time whenever something needs to be delayed or the scheduling needs to be adjusted, this is well communicated to players ahead of time. By today's standards, it is very rare to see reputable gacha games have extended amounts of dead periods without any events running or last-minute delays. During an interview, Kano Yoshiki, the director for the Lost Belt arcs, said that the game will be overhauling its bond system
Mr. 2
in order to address the shortcomings of how bond CEs work in this game, and that it was a good idea to have as many servants at bond 10 as you can, and that more news regarding the overhaul will be announced later. This interview was 2 years ago. A common sentiment I hear is, well, quality takes time, you can't just rush things. Now listen, for the record, I don't have a problem if the main story chapters take a long time.
One thing I want to say here before I forget about it is that, again, it's just adding on to what I said earlier. Remember that Los Angeles and Aniplex are publicly shared companies. I mean, Pseychie's even mentioned that himself too, with him talking about Aniplex specifically. Comparing, I would like to point out, not trying to like contradict him or anything, just want to point out that a lot of the newer gacha games, they don't come from like publicly traded companies. MiHoYo is not a publicly traded company, for example, despite what some people might think. That and the stock market, from what I understand, in China works a little differently. But I'm not going to get into that here. The point is that MiHoYo, for example, is not like a publicly traded company, so they have complete freedom over what the fuck kind of content it is that they want to put into their games. Not all of them, of course. For example, like I know Ananta, or formerly known as Project Mugen, coming up. Their publisher is NetEase, and I want to say, you know, NetEase is obviously a huge ass company. It's not like they're not like MiHoYo, where they became huge with Genshin. But they were already a big ass, Chinese conglomerate. Your 10 cents and shit like that. So that might be a different story. But a lot of gacha games out there are managed by independent devs who aren't like publicly traded. I mean, if you're a Chinese gacha, then you're not likely a publicly traded company or anything like that. Or even if you are, it's that they don't work how the rest of the world, like with the rest of the Western world at least, considers like a proper stock market. So it's a little different for them.
To release. The issue here is that writing for a live service game is different from writing for a single-player one. Nasu doesn't need to do all the stories. What matters is that the game is padded out with consistent and meaningful events with little to no dead air in between. Bring back 2-week events, just like how it was for the first 5 years of the game, reduce the grind, and make more side content. You are a multi-million-dollar franchise, so act like one. Now I want to talk about player appreciation and responsiveness. On the NA servers during the Tunguska Sanctuary event in December 2023, there was an Ivan the Terrible raid boss scheduled. However, due to an error with time zones, this raid was skipped and the next story mode began immediately. This means if you made a guide or plan to grind out the boss drops, those plans were null and void. NA players had permanently missed out on this portion of FGO history. The compensation was a measly 10 Saint quartz, enough for just over 3 pulls.
And this is why I do not wish for any new age gacha player to ever have the displeasure of playing a gacha game that has to be years behind the original server. Anytime a new gacha comes out, I expect it to have a global simultaneous release. So you can imagine my disappointment when Girls Frontline 2 first came out in China, and not simultaneously all around the world. That was kind of bullshit. And then of course, Mika Team decides to break the emergency glass and release GFL 2 a year later because they were getting shit on by their own Chinese players. So, good one, Yu Zhong. We see you need more money for some more Porsches of yours. But anyways. Even if the Ivan the fucking skipped ass Ivan raid we had isn't directly related, because now that I think about it, it's not exactly a great reason. Even still, it's like when you're behind in content and you still have content missed, and all you get is like fucking 10 Saint quartz, which is only a third of a multi, by the way. Imagine, so like for example, back when Genshin Impact, right? Back when MiHoYo tried messing with Novelette's thingy, I forget exactly what the full situation was, and the Chinese players fucking rioted when they tried nerfing Novelette. MiHoYo backtracked that shit real fucking fast and like, okay, sorry, our bad, we didn't, sorry, caught emoji from Twitch 7 TV chat. And they not only walked that back, but they also gave everyone, not just the Chinese players, literally everyone, a full-ass multi, which is something that they've never done before. At least maybe they did it once before, but it's extremely rare. If they've done it more than once, they've only done it like twice in the 4.5 years going on, the 4.5 going on 4.5 years that Genshin's been out, and it was a full multi. Now, imagine if Genshin, if MiHoYo, say they promised us like an event, for example, right? But something happened and something went wrong. Sorry, we have to cut one portion of like an event out, right? Like a mini game, for example, right? Oh, you can't play it anymore. Sorry, there's nothing we can do. And they only gave us, what's a third of a Genshin Genshin multi? 1,600 gems, divide that by 3. So let's say they give you 500 gems for that, right? I mean, some people will be happy, of course, because, hey, it's free gems. But, like, it's like, well, there will be people out there who are going to be extremely upset that, hey, we missed out on this fucking content, bro. Right? I mean, given that Genshin is fucking the biggest gacha game in the world, of course you're going to have, even if like only 1% of people are actually angry about it, most of them are, that's still like 1% of like 1 million people or some shit, just throwing out a random big number out there. You're still going to have a lot of people talking about it on Twitter, So maybe not the greatest example now that I think about it, but just imagine some sort of situation on a big gacha where it's like, oh, sorry, we promised this one part of this content that a lot of people were looking forward to, but we can't deliver because of some bullshit reason. Oh, we can't do anything about it. Here's like 100 primo gems, for example. It's kind of what it feels like. Anyways, the main thing I wanted to address here is that the reason why I don't want any new age gacha player to know what this feels like, to know what it feels like to play a gacha that's like literally years behind the original server, is because of incidents like this, where it's like you feel like a second or even a third class citizen. I mean, let's be real. If you play any gacha game for that matter, any gacha that's not like based out, that's not like a Western studio, or let's say for example you're an American gacha player like I am, and you're not playing one that's like developed by an American studio, right? All my gacha games are managed by Japanese, Chinese, and Korean devs and or companies, and so I have to live with the fact, all of us have to live with the fact that we are always going to be treated as second-class citizens because they're never going to listen to what we have to say. They're only going to listen to what their home audiences have to say because that's the most important player base. The one exception is Blue Archive because Nexon decided to release Blue Archive out in Japan first, and then the global servers after. So they're like the one exception. But hey, it still applies because for Nexon, at least for Blue Archive, their home audience is the Japanese, and so they have to do everything that the Japanese players want them to do, or at least demand out of them. And they've definitely had their moments. Let me tell you that much, where they've bowed to the Japanese players, like, all right, our bad, here you go, here's your just rewards, right? But for the most part, those companies are never really gonna do that for anybody else. They will only really respect and listen to the critiques and the opinions of like the masses of their home audience, nothing more than that. So that's already bad enough, right? Knowing that you have to play a game of like Zenless Zones. I mean, Zenless is a bad example, so I'll just keep bullying Genshin or Wuwa or Star Rail for that matter. If you are an overseas player of any of those gacha games, and you want your voice to be heard, right? You have some very strong opinions about the game, and you want the developers to like listen to what you have to say. Hey, here's a survey for every version of a client patch. Fill that out. Hopefully that makes you feel any better playing this fucking game. That's the best you're gonna get. Sorry, you're not Chinese. That's how it is. Like, that's as bad as I want anybody to experience that shit. So playing a game like FGO, where not only you are not their home audience, but also you are fucking 2 years behind in content? Nah, bro. You're not even a second-class citizen. We're fucking third-class citizens at that point. I think I mentioned in an earlier part of this review, like in either one of the two earlier videos, that like the NA server is basically like an afterthought. It pretty much is. Like one of the only reasons why like especially Japanese gachas, or at least gacha games that have multiple servers that came out at different times, right? Like, oh, a Chinese or a Japanese server came out first, and then the global server came out, or like an NA server came out later. One of the only reasons why they do that is so that they can make easy money. Because they already made the game. All they need to do is just recycle their old fucking content, just do a little bit of localization, make sure it's okay, right? Just it's passable, it's decent, right? Who cares if they localize the lore well enough, right? Fuck the players. What do they care? All they care about is money, money, money. I mean, they're gacha games. What the fuck did you expect? So yeah, no. One of the many reasons why I tell people not to fucking play this game.
I understand that developers can sometimes mess up. That's fine. What I look for in that case is how they respond to that mistake. I know FGO's had its generous moments, but the way the game's maintenance is handled is pretty questionable. During the 7th NA anniversary, there were quite a number of times when the service unexpectedly went offline. I'm sure a lot of players will say, well, they compensated players for the maintenance, so there shouldn't be any problems. But think about the inconveniences this may have caused, about the players that may have had limited time in their day to play, or that they were doing something important, but suddenly gets cut off from playing. In recent times, I mean,
it's not even about the players in this case, even though I myself made an argument for like, oh yeah, think about people who don't have a lot of time to play gacha games, for example, right? Back when Mr. Pseychie was talking about how, like, there should be little to no downtime in a gacha game's content cycle, or content schedule. Here, I don't even think that's even necessary. It's even necessary to point out those kinds of players are not. You don't even need to like appeal to like the masses here. It's just embarrassing for your gacha game to just constantly have to be in maintenance. Especially when you look at, modern gacha games these days, or hell, even other old school gachas, like Girls Frontline 1 and Azure. Well, Girls Frontline 1 had, like, weekly maintenances, pretty much, but at least you know when they were coming. Like, they were always scheduled, so it's not like you shouldn't have known about them. Azure Lane, Azure Lane also has, like, emergency maintenance quite often, actually, so that's probably not a very good counterexample, but, if you were to compare them to modern games, because obviously those three are the only old school gacha games that I play. If you compare them to modern games, modern gacha games don't typically have emergency maintenances. I don't think Hoyo's ever had a single emergency maintenance. Maybe they had like a couple back when their games first came out, like maybe specifically when like Genshin came out, maybe. But with Star Rail and Zenless, I don't think they've had a single emergency maintenance. Right, outside of like the proper maintenances where it's like, oh, we brought down the servers because we're in the middle of changing patch clients or client versions. Okay, like that's clearly a good enough reason, right? No one's gonna give them too much of a hard time over that, I hope. But outside of those, I don't think either of those games, Star Rail or Zenless, had any form of like emergency maintenance. At least I don't remember anything like that happening. So it's like, if those games can do it, again, like what Mr. Pseychie is saying, what's FGO doing? What the fuck is Aniplex's excuse?
Never heard of a top gacha game ever having this problem. Now, let's try comparing this to a more competent development team. Quite a while ago, I completed Limbus Company's Chapter 5.
Oh, are we starting to Limbus glazing now?
Visual novel style gacha game. I gotta say, the story is
unironically small
so
indie developer, by the way.
Got some competition in the story department. This is a game where the writers are extremely confident in the character designs, since there are only 12 characters in the main cast, and all units pulled in the gacha are different versions of the 12. Project Moon releases a main story chapter fully voiced every 4 months, with an interlude chapter in the middle of that 4 months wait time. The game is rich with...
And I hear they finally made enough money to hire and do actual Japanese voice acting too, so, obligatory glory to Project Moon comment here, I suppose.
Lore, a very strong cast of characters, and bi-weekly updates for quality of life changes and new content. The difference of how this developer handles update schedules and feedback is night and day. The thing is, developer responsiveness is not hard to do. Communicate what you heard from the players, what you're working on, and a rough schedule for when these problems will be fixed.
Again, this goes back to, rather. What am I using big words for? Or fancy ass sounding words for? This goes back to what I was talking about with like newer gacha games having to compete with older gacha games. Older gacha games, this might sound like me making an excuse for FGO here. I'm not. I'm just telling it how it is. Older gacha games, because they are older, because they are more established, because they already have bigger player bases, right? Or more, maybe not bigger, but more well-established player bases, because they've been playing those older gacha games for much longer than new ones, obviously. Older gacha games can afford to not really improve their game, or at least they have the option to if they don't want to. Obviously, that's not always the case. There are older gacha games that have been doing their best to keep up in the gacha sphere, modernize themselves and evolve to include more recent, gacha trends such as pity and all that good stuff. So it doesn't apply to everyone, of course. But in the case of FGO, for example, they've certainly haven't been able to keep up as much as they should, or even are able to, as we might expect them to. But the thing is that it's FGO. The IP carries them, and it's been out for much longer than, say, a Limbus company. And so they can afford to just kind of sit on their asses, sit on their laurels, and just kind of twiddle their thumbs and be like, oh, when's our next banner coming up? Right? When's the next time we can make an easy $10 million in 3 days? Like, that's all they really need to do, really. The only way to get them to change, realistic way to get them to change is by convincing their players, their home audience, and like sort of mobilizing them, if that's not too strong of a word, and getting them to, like, dare I use this term, boycott the game by like not spending any money on it, and hell, even stopping stopping themselves from playing the fucking game. Obviously that is impossible to do at any scale unless Aniplex or FGO or Sony does something extremely fucking retarded. But until such time happens, you can assume that you can't just, an entire player base for a big game like FGO, for example, isn't just going to go offline immediately, all at once, and much less all at once. So they can kind of keep this gravy train rolling without really much consequence, pretty much. And to developers, and especially to the companies themselves. And remember, Lozangle and or Aniplex are both publicly traded companies on the stock market, on the Japanese stock market, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, what the fuck do they care? These are fucking corpo shareholders that don't play FGO at all. At least I don't think they do. These are probably all old fucking Japanese boomers who are more interested in, securing their own fucking retirement pensions and making more money for whatever reason, either for themselves or their families or whatever, right? Rather than having any sort of vested interest in making FGO better. Whereas Limbus Company, on the other hand, they're a smaller indie studio. So they have much more agency, like I said earlier, over how exactly they want to go about developing their game over time. And Limbus Company is also a very new game. It's only been out, literally yesterday, at the day of me recording this video. Literally yesterday or was it earlier today, actually? It was their second anniversary stream. So 2 years of Limbus. That's still pretty young for a gacha, right? Compared to FGO, that's almost a decade old. It's 5 times older than Limbus is. So a game like Limbus, not only they have the advantage, in my opinion anyway, over a game like FGO, where the developers do have more agency over developing their game exactly the way they want to. However, they don't have a choice. They have to use that advantage if they want to put themselves out there as, hey, we are a new gacha game. You should come check out our game because we are better than the competition. Right? Because the gacha game every year just keeps getting more and more saturated, right? And it's not going to get any better. Unless, like, a lot of gacha games go suddenly EOS, but, gacha games do EOS all the time, but the more popular ones certainly don't. It takes them a little bit longer to EOS, too, if they do at all. FGO. So, you have to convince players, you have to convince people who already play other gacha games to come and play your game. And what Limbus Company is doing here with their apparently what seems to be, because I don't play Limbus, I'm not familiar with Limbus or Project Moon intimately, at least. What they seem to be doing here is giving their players it says literally right at the top here, a fucking roadmap of the content they can expect to get over the coming weeks to months or whatever, right? Clear developer communication, like Pseychie mentioned earlier, and just all the good stuff. Just quality of life changes, anti consumer abuse. That's a weird way to put it, but more consumer or player friendly gacha mechanics / gacha grind or whatever, gameplay, I should say. All that good stuff, where it's gacha games are becoming less committal and more respecting of players' time and hopefully money. Well, not so much money, but you get the idea.
FGO is the first game I've reviewed from a Japanese developer, and historically Japan tends to be a more traditional and reserved culture. However, this doesn't have to be the norm, because you can so easily go above and beyond if you do it right. For example, Konami currently...
Yes, another fucking 30-minute tangent on this one. So it's interesting that Pseychie brings up the fact that brings up, how, oh yeah, Japanese culture is more reserved and stuff like that. Let me take that about 5 steps further. I've talked about this on my own stream quite a few times whenever people bring up this topic. Also, Konami, Omega lol. I don't want to fucking look at Konami, so I'll just give you this frame instead. What you have to understand about Japanese corpo culture. Actually, this is just something ingrained into Japanese culture itself. It's just on a general basis, but especially in their corporate world too. The Japanese, how they tend to operate traditionally is that y'all have heard the phrase. Y'all have heard the phrase called "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." Right? I'm sure we're all familiar with that. Well, the Japanese are basically the living embodiment of that, culturally speaking. If they do something this way, and it's always worked for them, and they don't have an immediate reason to change it, they are not going to change it. And so how that translates over to their corporate world is that if a Japanese company has a way of doing things, and it works for them, and it suits their needs, everything that they want, what they want to do, whatever methods that they use to get, to accomplish their goals, if it does everything that they want for them, that's it. They don't really care to improve much beyond that or do anything about that at all. And again, in the corporate sense, if it makes money, if it makes them enough or more than enough money, then why the fuck would they change anything? It's only when it becomes very obvious to the Japanese that the Japanese people can no longer just ignore it and just kind of brush it on, just kind of like sweep it under the rug, so to speak, is when they will actually change anything. And when they do, they change everything about them, about what they do, everything about what it is that they're doing, drastically. This has happened to them quite a few times over history, culturally speaking. For example, the Meiji Restoration, post World War II, after they got nuked. Well, that's a harsh way of putting it. After they lost World War II, all that good stuff. I think an earlier point would be, or actually even going further back in history, back when Japan closed itself off to foreigners initially the first time, and only let the Dutch? I think it was the Dutch, not the Portuguese. The Dutch be the only foreigners that they could trade with, and only on one island. And then the initial opening up when we sent Commodore Perry and our gunboats over to, how did that that famous YouTube video go? Stop being so closed or whatever. And Japan was like, wait a minute, what the fuck are these things? Well, what the fuck are these things? And so they sent out an international envoy to like travel around the world for a little bit and see how things were going on in the outside world, because they realized clearly, like, what the fuck are these gunboat things? How far behind are we? And once they came back, they were like, oh yeah, we're really far behind. We gotta do something. And that's when they started changing everything about themselves, as a people, as a nation, blah blah blah, all that stuff. So that's how the Japanese have always been. That's kind of ingrained into their culture. They don't change for anything if what they have going on works for them. But when it's time to change, they fucking go balls to the wall, fucking 200-300%, crank that knob up and fucking break it, type shit. In order to find something new that works again. And they sit on that for like God knows how long. The cycle repeats, basically. And so that's sort of what I want to mention here, just to give more context to what Pseychie was mentioning here. Let me review this again.
Traditional and reserved culture. However, this doesn't have to be the norm, because you can so
Yeah, so I think he's talking about, like, he gets that Japanese culture is more reserved and whatever, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, they normally are, but again, like I explained, they have moments in their history where they throw conservatism out the window, at least from like a development standpoint, and they just go hard. They just go fucking hard all the time, hard until they find something new that works for them, or until they like reinvent themselves or some shit. It's some you can actually, now that I think about it, you can kind of see a little bit of that now, where Japan, geopolitically speaking, is seeing China more as a growing threat to their national security, and so that's why they've been working with the Americans, or not just with the Americans, but with other nations as well, the Philippines, Taiwan, in order to strike up geopolitical alliances specifically to counter China, and they've been expanding their military budget and their military itself by quite a bit. They now have 2 fully operational aircraft carriers. They're basically carriers. They call them helicopter destroyers, but they can fucking fly F-35. So how much of a helicopter destroyer are you exactly? One of them actually, I think late last year, one of them actually came down to San Diego to run Navy drills with some of our boats too, or some of our ships too. So there you go. So yeah. And they're expanding. They're even, some people are even going so far as to consider repealing the article in the treaty we have with them that we signed after we beat them in World War II, where they cannot have a standing military. Because for those of you who don't know, Japan technically does not have a standing military, because we Americans forbade them from having one, because it was right after World War II. It's don't try this war shit again, please. Don't start conquering your fucking neighbors again like you used to. And not that us Americans didn't do that sometimes too, but still. In that context, we were maybe don't have a military. But obviously that was 80 years ago. 80, 90 years ago. Times have changed. And with China being an ever-growing threat to the Japanese, or at least that's how the Japanese see it, politically anyway, yeah, now there's talk of maybe we should repeal that. The article where it says that, we can't have a military anymore. Because they don't have a military. The military that they do have is technically considered a self-defense force. That's the legal terminology that they use to get around not having military. Because, you kind of, if you're a country, you probably should have a military. Otherwise, if you don't have one, then, well, good luck being a country for long. Good luck being a country for very long. Well, some countries do get away with that, but they're usually located in pretty geopolitically stable areas. Unfortunately for Ukraine. Too bad we took away their nukes. We shouldn't have, honestly. Well, hindsight is 20/20. But anyways, I'm getting off track. Sorry, I'm a geopolitics amateur, so you might find me ranting about those kinds of things from time to time. Anyways, back to Japan. So yeah, that's how the Japanese corporate mindset is. You can definitely see that in a game like FGO, right? That's also another reason why, Japanese gachas aren't really that commonly played anymore. All the big gachas are Chinese and sometimes Korean. Japanese gachas have really fallen behind a lot because Japanese companies don't care to expand that much. We should consider ourselves, honestly, lucky that we even have NAFGO. Or any other Japanese gacha that has an overseas server, especially an American one. Those games are exceedingly lucky that their companies ever even decided to release an NA server in the first place. Because there are many stories out there of other Japanese game gachas trying to release an American server and then just pulling up because they lost too much money, they can't afford it, right? And they're like, oh, this isn't worth it, and they just pull out. I believe the Sennon Aegis American or the NA, the English server, would kind of end up like that, where it's like, oh, Sennon Aegis got an English server. Oh, it's dead 6 months later or some shit. So, and not only that, but most Japanese gachas also come out years after, same thing as FGO. Preco was like that, or Preco EN was like that. Actually, Preco was even worse because that shit was 3 years behind. Holy fuck! Not even just 2, 3. God, that was such retarded. Ugh, the fucking mental incompetence of these Japanese companies sometimes, man. Holy fuck. That and Crunchyroll is dog shit too, so it's not entirely the Japanese fault. Crunchyroll is fucking incompetent as fuck too. So, but yeah, hopefully I've made my point abundantly clear on this topic.
Easily go above and beyond if you do it right. For example, Konami, currently developing the remake for Metal Gear Solid 3, released a conference of the producers of the project discussing the fans' feedback. They were willing to show all the comments, both positive and negative. This was a bold move, but it also won back a lot of player goodwill after their treatment of the Metal Gear Solid franchise before.
I know Pseychie is only used as an example, so I should only take it at face value. But yeah, right. It's still Konami. They can still go fuck themselves.
Even then, being reserved
Make some more fucking pachinko machines, why don't you?
doesn't make someone incompetent. If you don't have any transparency with players, you are still expected to roll out content updates in a reasonable schedule. If you say nothing, that will still cause people to doubt you. It's not something that's out of the realm of possibilities. They have the budget to do it. Earlier this year, they did the first servant animation updates after 2 years, revamping the animations of the two SSR Jean versions to make them appear more fluid in gameplay. There's even a unique attack animation if you attack Jill as Jean. That's a really nifty way to add attention to detail. They didn't have to do this, but they did. During the 7th anniversary, the game
More on those animation updates. They used to pump out animation updates on a regular basis back when Lozenga was still with the Lightworks. Like during the middle of FGO's life cycle, I want to say like it was either every few months or something like that, maybe twice a year, maybe at the very least. They would roll out batches of servant animation updates. They don't do that anymore. And while most servants still have passable animations, a lot of them still are stuck with their old ass fucking animations though, or quite a few at least anyway. And those ones still need animation updates. So. And we've been waiting for them for God knows how long. And so yeah, just goes to show you just how much less work has been put into FGO ever since the dev team rebranded to Lozenga. Again, because Aniplex and Lozenga are publicly shared companies, or they're on the Japanese stock market, I wouldn't be so harsh on the developers themselves. This is definitely corporate meddling, if you were to ask me. But still, you can't just not make criticisms of this, you know. I just wish that, and I just hope that people have the wherewithal to be the cognizance to realize that they shouldn't be blaming the devs as much. They should be putting a lot of the blame on like Aniplex and the fucking shareholders, the people who own stocks of Aniplex and even Lozenga if they're publicly traded too on the stock exchange or whatever. Because the director, Kano Yoshiki, the dude that Pseychie brought up not too long ago, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's very passionate about FGO. I say this because he does his very best, or at least that's the sense he gives us, at least. So maybe it's just propaganda, but still, at least he's trying, and I appreciate the effort. I at least appreciate the effort. It was a lot better than back when we had fucking Shiokawa, that bitch. He tries to give NA as much as he possibly can, at least in terms of like early content. If you go check out the Aniplex USA YouTube channel, basically their English YouTube channel, every once in a while you can find like FGO related videos, and some of them are actually, they're called Chaldea radio broadcasts. They're like the closest thing we have to like the whole like communication between players and devs thing that Pseychie keeps talking about. So it's not that FGO has none, it's just, you know, it would be nice if we had more. But what little we do have, like if you take a look at all of the radio broadcasts that Kano Yoshiki has shown up in, you'll notice he actually starts speaking English. Not only that, but he actually practices his English to the point where these days he can actually deliver those Chaldea radio broadcasts speaking just English. Now his pronunciation can still use a lot of work, obviously. He's not a native English speaker, but like he went from like only being able to speak like phrases and like strings of English words to like no, he can actually carry a conversation. He can actually do his entire speech in English now, even if it's just a speech, right? He at least is putting in the effort to let the NA players know that he wants to let us know that he actually cares, or at least wants to give the image that he cares, and that's at least a lot more effort that he's putting in than, for example, like Shiokawa didn't. So, and not just that, right? The JP players love him too. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that the JP players are also given the benefit of the doubt that he's also just doing everything he can to make FGO as good of a game as he can. But he's got his hands tied behind his back pretty much with 3 layers of duct tape and some more packing tape just for good measure by the fucking shareholders, right? Capitalism basically, or corporate capitalism, I should say. So I just want to throw that one out there. However, these criticisms should still be made, just maybe not towards Los Angeles specifically. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're doing their best here.
The gameplay system also added a buff to quick chains and adding the mighty chain, which both shake up the game in a major way. So I know Losango is capable of doing these improvements if they really set their mind to it. Keep doing those animation updates, just like how they've done in the past. I'm sure a lot of players would like to see the end of the infamous caster balls. What about Leonidas? His MP animation is just literally
caster balls are an animation, is a nickname. Flashbang.
Standing there against
is a nickname that we give to like some of the beginner, the year 1 casters. When they attack, all they do is like throw like energy balls at people. So hence caster balls.
The black background.
But anyways, the point is that a lot of servants still need animation updates desperately because they are super outdated.
So I mentioned this in the previous video, but it pays to be stingy. If players are willing to give a developer a pass despite not being treated too well, that is the perfect scenario to be in. This is because when the developer eventually does something that's minutely good, they get praise like the second coming of Christ. Look at the overwhelming amount of praise when the genre animation updates happened. I guess Losango is the good guys after all. I guess they do care about us. Now, I'm sure the game has had its moments, like the pity system, alongside full-screen cutscenes and optimization brought to the NA servers early, so I do want to give them credit that not all of it is bad. I know some people could argue, well, FGO has been improving in its own way. But if you watch the entirety of this review...
Who the fuck says that? And what the fuck do they even mean by that? Improve in its own way? What kind of fucking retard said that? Let me know.
I am not judging
Like, what exactly do they fucking mean? Improving in its own way? Fucking tourist.
FGO by how much it's improved by its own metrics. This display of artificially prolonging events, a snail's pace schedule for main story chapters, and dead periods vastly outnumbering the times when the game undergoes drastic change. So I'm granting them the below expectations rating once again.
Good.
To be honest,
Fuck
this
them.
section would
Fuck
have been even
FGO.
longer, but I don't see the point of beating a dead horse. I haven't even talked about the lack of content.
What's this? Is this technically a different setting? No, technically not.
Outnumbering the times. There were 2 reruns scheduled for main story chapters, and dead periods vastly outnumbering the times when the game undergoes drastic change. So I'm granting them the below expectations rating once again. To be honest, this section would have been even longer, but I don't see the point of beating a dead horse. I haven't even
you should.
talked about the lack of content this year as well. There were 2 reruns back-to-back for a total of 6 weeks, so for roughly 2 months, there was no significant new content. For the record, I don't consider events quests or interludes as events, since it's a basic expectation that challenge content is rolled out periodically, much like how the majority of gacha games just release them as monthly or bi-weekly editions. They are not events. Now, this portion of the video was appended on the very last day before the video was uploaded. And after seeing the announcements of the 9th anniversary, I just gotta say, yikes. There were no major quality of life changes, and the addition of the 2 new append skills are another way to artificially add grind while requiring players to pull even more copies of the unit. However, the reason this video was delayed for a day is that after the JP player base did some convincing on Twitter, against all odds, Losango actually issued a response within 24 hours. You can now transfer 1 append skill to another, so while this still doesn't change the fact that you have to pull 8 or more copies of an SSR to max everything out, it is at least something. Not to mention, all coins spent on grill casting will be refunded. I need to emphasize this part because Lysenko responding to the player base at all is extremely unprecedented. This must have struck a nerve so hard that it forced their hand.
Again, it just goes to reinforce what I said, some of the shit that I said earlier. One, that Gacha developers will only really listen to their home audience, and two, well, actually, the first one is the only thing that I mentioned earlier. The second one is actually something new. Well, technically new. My personal theory on why they changed that shit so much is that I think when FGO released the whole append skill, the A4 and A5 update, Kano Yoshiki or just the developers in general were like, yeah, no, we don't really like this change. But they were forced to do it anyway because, publicly traded company. And so they went with it anyway, but then they had a contingency plan just in case. Or perhaps maybe that's how they wanted to release it as in the beginning, but, Aniplex was like, no, fucking don't do that. Release it like this, right? The usual corporate bullshit meddling. But since they still had it on the back burner, they were like, they just lost it when the day, the night that they released this update, and all the fucking Japanese players are fucking shitting on them for this. Lozing was able to go to Aniplex or whoever their fucking bosses are, their shareholder bosses are, and they were able to look, show them like, hey, look, this is what our players are fucking saying about this shitty fucking thing. We got to do something, and we know how to fix this, or at least we know how to put a fucking band-aid over this at the very least. Or Aniplex was like, fix this at least a little bit, but don't go too far over, something like that. And so that's how they were able to come out with a response that fucking fast. Because normally situations like this, if a studio or like a developer doesn't have like an answer for this, like just sit in the background or not an obvious one, then they would take a little bit of time. Even in the case of Japanese studios. I mean, actually, should I even say even there? Especially in the case of a Japanese studio, perhaps. But yeah, I want to say that's kind of what happened, or like some variation of that happened. Pure speculation on my part. Obviously, I don't play JP, so fuck if I know what actually happened. But that's what I want to imagine. But yeah, if nothing else, that should just go to show you that if you're a gacha studio or a publisher or whatever, you don't piss off your home audience. Because if you do, then, you have to respond. And as a gacha studio, it's better that you don't have to. Because if you just sit back and say nothing, then, nobody has any ammo to use against you. But the moment it's the moment you start opening your mouth and start blabbing, like I am, that people learn more about you. They can use what you say against you in the future, that sort of shit. So, companies just prefer not to just conveniently ignore all the criticism and all the fucking, negative feedback and just keep doing what they're doing, ideally. Or at least, the bigger gacha games like these, for instance.
As many pointed out, this is not nearly enough to address the piss-poor implementation of servant coins, and it does not change my perception of Lysenko as a company. It comes down to whether the big spenders are okay with this as the minimal amount of improvements. Remember, with a lot of these larger corporations, you give an inch, they take a mile. But hey, we'll see if 120 quartz is all it takes to shut the players up.
We give an inch, they take a mile? It's not even that, bro. They don't even give us any. They don't even it's more like what? They give us an inch, they take a mile. That's better.
The Fate universe is vast. Possibly one of the largest Japanese intellectual properties out there. One cannot deny their cultural significance, as well as the quality of its story and character designs. At its core, FGO's gameplay loop is fine. Simplistic on the surface, but with layers of complexity under the hood. I think in terms of freedoms and builds or strategy, the game allows servants from all varieties to shine. For a game that has held steady for 9 years, I would say it still speaks a lot about its staying power and the dedication of its fanbase. I tend to go a bit easier on older games, since I know they never had the foresight of modernizing it to the current market. That being said, FGO has had a lot of opportunities to improve its mechanics and make changes. Now, I'll tell you the one argument I hate when any defense regarding live service games show up. You can't criticize the game because the devs will fix these problems in the future. My response to this will be the same every time. I can't predict the future. Neither can you. I will review the product
All right, calm down there, Mr. Pokey.
in front of me right now. Regardless if anything gets fixed in the near future, the problems I have stated in this video have been affecting the game for the better part of 7 years. I actually started on the script for this video by early May. The reason this wasn't put out sooner is because I wanted to wait until the announcements of the 9th anniversary to make sure that people can't make this argument. So for anything listed in the video, they are still valid criticisms. I've seen the anniversary announcements. I know it, you know it. And who knows, part of me really believed they fixed some of the game's problems, but hey, maybe 10th time's the charm. I've stuck with FGO for more than 2 years, and I believe being a fan of something is not to blindly defend it, but to critique it so that it may become better. For those in denial of the state that the game is in, despite going into the modern gacha market, let me ask you. Does having a laughable pity system, poor developer responsiveness, and a lack of quick farm features give FGO its own unique identity? Is it part of the game's creative vision to leave out crucial
It does, but not in a good way.
skill descriptions in-game and mislead players through the UI? The weird part is, FGO is the one true anomaly in the gacha industry. Despite everything that has happened, the game remains to have an extremely loyal and dedicated community. If another dev tried to do things at the pace of FGO, the game would fail. Delightworks has literally tried that, and the game shut down in 6 months. You've seen the rating on the thumbnail. I cannot deny that the backbones of the story is supported by industry veterans, and when it shines, it absolutely deserves to be praised. But the game is hugely marred by a mismanaged development team. Because part of me wanted to bump down the rating even more after seeing the dismal 9th anniversary announcements. I personally believe complacency and mediocrity should not be rewarded. And this company right here is one huge pile of it. All I have to say when seeing the status of this game is, after 2 long years, I'm finally out. With these final words, I want to
so he's no longer playing FGO. Good.
A review is ultimately an informed opinion. You are allowed to disagree with me on any points in the video. I know that FGO, and by extension the Type Moon franchise, has a long-standing fanbase. I know there are a lot of people passionate about this game. I do not want you to stop having fun with this game. What I want to do is to point out the good and the flaws, and push the development team to make the game better. Asking someone to play a gacha game for 2 years is a very long time. I stuck with the game throughout my journey because I was engrossed in the lore and the story of the Fate universe. Truth be told, I will likely pick up Tsukihime and Mahoyo down the line as well. They're both genuinely amazing stories by some of the best writers on the other side of the world. With that said, I appreciate your time being here today. You're free to leave behind any feedback or criticisms of this video down below. If you enjoyed the video and want more gacha content just like this one, you know what to do. Thanks for watching, and as always, have fun out there.
Like I said, I'll be reviewing Pseychie's other other gacha reviews as well, or at least the ones that I actually played. Okay. Finally, we've gotten to the end, and before the 3-hour mark too. But I'll be yapping for probably a little while longer. Hopefully not too long. I've already yapped for long enough. Almost what 11 hours going on 12 hours worth of content I've squeezed out of fucking lesson 2. Lovely. But hey, that should show you how much I fucking know, how much you know, I have to fucking say about, you know, dog shit gacha games like this. Anyways, since the last 3 videos, including this one, were like titled to be like a review of the review, I guess it's my time to review the review now. It's very thorough, obviously. This video is over an hour and a half long, so I appreciate the thoroughness. I also appreciate that he's at least played this game for at least 2 years, at least before he quit, it seems like. So, He's definitely more qualified than a lot of others to be, to make an overall review on FGO. Not as much as me, but still, that's besides the point. I would say, I don't know if I want to give this review like a score. That feels a little bit tacky. I just personally I feel like that feels a little bit tacky. So I'm not gonna say that I'm gonna give this a 7 out of 10, an 8 out of 10, or a 9 out of 10 review or whatever. I'm just gonna leave my opinions here and my suggestions moving forward for how he should be doing it, how he should do the rest of his reviews. Again, just suggestions. This channel, so he can make his videos and run his YouTube channel however he wants. The structuring of the video was fine, I think. I would say that the introduction into FGO took a little bit, but then again, considering the rest of his video is the bulk of his video is an hour and a half long. I guess that's fine. Again, there was that little bit in the beginning where it's like, why are you talking about another one of the Lightworks' games when you could just say that, oh yeah, they made these two other games, but whatever, they weren't really much of anything. Yeah, I don't really have a big problem with this review. So I guess honestly, it's more efficient for me to just point out the parts of it that I didn't like, if there are any. There are. I think my biggest issue with this review. I'm gonna sound like a fucking Karen here, so do excuse me. I don't really like talking like this, because this is gonna sound very personal. But at times during this video, I didn't really like his attitude, specifically whenever he is like trying to counter specific or counter possible counter arguments, if that makes any sense, right? Whenever he goes, but I already know what you're saying, or oh, don't worry, like I know what you're thinking, that sort of stuff. I do that too sometimes. At least I used to. I'm trying to change the way I talk, or trying to change the way I script my videos, to where I don't say that shit anymore. It's a personal thing more than anything. I don't really like it when like YouTubers or just people talking in general assume that they know what their audience is about to say. I think that's very arrogant on their part. And this is coming from a dude who literally calls himself the god of fucking gacha, the fucking god of gacha, right? Why is a dude like me who has an ego that big to call himself the fucking god of gacha saying that he doesn't like it when other people are trying to sound all arrogant and shit? Well, I guess for one, since I call myself the god of gacha, and very few other people are, and Pseychie is definitely not one of them. He's probably closer to my status than anyone else's, or most other gacha content creators are, to be fair, but, as far as sheer gacha experience goes, I still don't consider him anywhere near my level. Talking about arrogance, eh? But, just pure, not even from a god of gacha, content, not even considering that context, I just don't really like it when public speakers or YouTubers or whatever, whenever I listen to like video essays such as this, or reviews, like say that a lot. Once or twice, I suppose, is okay, but he has that sort of attitude throughout, pretty somewhat regularly throughout this video, where he kind of takes that stance of like he assumes what the counter argument would be. Not that he's wrong on most of them. I don't think anytime he did pull up like a I know what you're thinking kind of thing, or don't even get me started on blah blah blah, or like whatever else he says, in order to counter a possible argument, or counter a possible counter argument, counter the counter. Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. is that it just sounds like you've only been playing FGO for 2 years, and yet you have the gall to think that you already know what players think. Again, to be fair, it's not like those criticisms are like it's only stuck to like 1 or 2 people. They were most of the time they were fairly common criticism. Well, at least maybe to him. Some of these counter arguments that Pseychie brought up in order to counter himself, I don't think I've really ever heard. Then again, I've only ever been like dealing with the NA community. I mean, I would assume Pseychie too. I don't know if Pseychie speaks Japanese or is involved in the JP community. But still, like, I don't like it when I've been trying to cut back on the amount of times I say shit like, "Oh, I already know what you're thinking." I used to do that, again. I used to do that a lot too. And then I grew up a little bit and realized maybe I shouldn't really say that anymore because that sounds really, really fucking annoying to deal with. That and the other problem I have with it is that it doesn't like that like basically shuts down any sort of conversation you might have. Now, obviously, Pseychie isn't like looking to have a conversation here. This is just a video essay, of course, so it's not like he's gonna realistically have a conversation with people. Maybe he does. I haven't checked the comment section yet. Maybe he does discuss things with some of the comments down below. But I highly doubt he does that. And I think that's kind of a shame because towards the end of the video here, he explicitly says shit like, "Oh, I just want to mention the things that a gacha is good at and the things that a gacha is bad at in order to give suggestions on how to improve." And he goes on this whole spiel about how, well, not a whole spiel, but he does mention that he thinks that being a true fan of a gacha involves like acknowledging its good points, but also pointing out where it's bad, right? Well, a part of that involves having a discussion, right? Because only by talking with players and then eventually talking with the developers after you've talked amongst yourselves, after players have discussed among themselves what they really think about, the state of their gacha game as it is right now, where they think it's headed, how they think it's been handled so far. Only then can they formulate their consolidate their ideas and their suggestions and their problems, their concerns with the game. Can they communicate that effectively to developers, assuming they are even listening, of course. Assuming that they are, then yeah, that's how you ideally want to go about it. So I suppose the other big problem that I mentioned that I have with Pseychie's like almost arrogant tone of like, "Oh, I already know what you're thinking," that kind of thing, is that it implies that he's not interested in having a conversation, at least to me anyway. It gives off the sense that he's too good for he's too good for people who want to say something contrary to him. I give Pseychie the benefit of the doubt that that's not what he's going for. I'm just saying that that's just kind of what he comes off as. That would probably be my major issue with this video, because I do believe that you have to be harsh. He's been, at least compared to what I'm used to, he's been pretty fair towards FGO in this review so far, at least as far as I can tell. Obviously, he's kind of like pushed his tone a little bit, but at least for me, it was well within, like the polite territory. You don't want to listen to me actually, you have listened to me fucking review FGO, because this was a review of the review. So, yeah, y'all fucking listen. I subjected you all to almost 11-12 hours of me just ranting about FGO and how dog shit it is, just like Pseychie did. Well, to much more of an extent than he did, actually. What else? Is there anything else like that I can really criticize about this, really? I guess the other big thing. It seems to me that Pseychie does not understand how Losangle works. I mean, he did acknowledge that I actually find it kind of strange that he brought up Aniplex. and that he calls it a publicly traded company, and yet he puts all the blame, or it seems like he puts all the blame that he does throw out here in this video on Lozangle and not Aniplex. As I've hopefully made it abundantly clear, I would give Lozangle the benefit of the doubt when it comes to all of the weird and even bad decisions that they've made with FGO's development over time, and I pin that more on Aniplex, because they're the ones, they're technically Lozangle's bosses, because they're the publisher, blah blah blah, whatever. Or at the very least, if it's not Aniplex, if Aniplex doesn't have a direct role in FGO's development, then it's whoever Lozangle's fucking board of directors are, right? Because again, Lozangle, I want to say, is a publicly traded company, because Yoshinori Ono is working as board director there. Again, my information on that could be a bit iffy. I could even be wrong at some point, so I'm totally open to being corrected here. Get corrected, get corrected, get corrected. Sorry, the Blue Archive player in me was coming out there. So, yeah, I guess those are my two biggest problems. The fact that his tone at times can sound a little bit arrogant. I don't know what other word to use there. I think arrogant is too harsh of a word to use here. If there's like another word that's not as strong as arrogant, something a little less something less like provocative than that, then I would use that word. Just nothing's coming to my mind at the moment. So yeah, that, and then the fact that he seems to like be very gung-ho against Lozangle, when I think it's not Lozangle specifically that he should be gung-ho against, it's their board of directors, whoever's calling, whichever entity or person is calling all the shots at over there, as far as like game direction or like game development is concerned. So other than that, I think this is a pretty solid review. Normally I would say it's very long, but hey, it was thorough, and I'll deal with a really, really long video if it's at least thorough. That, and recently I had to watch a 90-minute fucking VOD stream from Mr. Pokey, and let's just say that it was a lot nicer listening to Mr. Pseichie's video or voice than it was listening to fucking Mr. Pokey's voice. Holy fuck. Anyways, so yeah, I think that's all I have to say. Anything else would just be me just blabbing on at this point, because this video is already 3 hours long too. Surprise, surprise. So I appreciate Pseichie for making this video. I think overall it was a great review. Nice and fair review. Some, obviously not perfect. There are some areas here that, as a veteran player, as a 7.5-year veteran player, I would have to disagree with, or have to like clarify or point out some context for. But yeah, 90% of this video was pretty spot on, and there's nothing really that I can say against it other than the two gripes that I had with it that I mentioned already. So that'll be it from me. Check out my socials, because this video has already been long enough, and we'll catch you next time for the next review of the review that I'll probably make on another one of Pseichie's Gacha reviews at some point. I haven't decided which one I'll do next, but for now, enjoy this one, or hope you enjoy this one. And yeah, until next time, peace. Have a good one.